Imagine waking up in a place that looks like your home, but something is slightly off. Every photo on the wall has unfamiliar faces, and the voices you hear calling your name aren't of anyone you know. What would you do when you realize you're not in your world anymore? Tonight, I'm bringing you real-life scary stories. Stories that creep under your skin, making you question whether you're really alone in the dark. Be ready, because once you hear these tales, you might not sleep the same again. Let's begin. I was 17 years old when Harry Sullivan proposed we killed Esme, and it was on our joint wedding day, 8 years later, my hands slick with my wife's blood. When his words finally hit me, there was a drilling sound in my head. Sometimes it was loud, other times it was faint, barely noticeable, but it was definitely there, getting closer and closer. Louder. I should have known not inviting Esme Lockhart to our party was a bad idea, but I was too tipsy to care. In my muddled mind, I would deal with the consequences later. Sitting on the beach with my knees pulled to my chest, a cool beer skimming my lips, I watched the tide ripple under my toes. The wind was trying to snatch the bottle from my hand, blowing my hair from my eyes. Behind me, the party was in full swing, and Esme was being weird again. Even through sharp blasts of wind trying to knock me over, I could hear her attempting to guilt-trip Wylan for talking to a girl. It's not like I didn't expect it. Wylan had told me about the weird notes in his locker, the low-key threats in his mailbox to not even think about leaving for college. I just didn't want to believe our best friend was this kind of obsessed with us. If I'm honest, though, Esme was long past obsession. Infatuation. This girl was a fucking psychopath. Downing my beer, I reveled in the scratchy taste. I didn't even like it, but it was better than drinking straight vodka, which made you a psychopath. Still though, the alcohol was perfect to lower my barriers and force words out of my mouth I had been choking on for years. I like to think the stars aligned when we were little kids, and fate found us. 5 7-year-olds with our hands on the last candy bar, pigtails, 4 eyes, Batman shirt, rich girl, and yellow hat. Initially, we fought for it. I snatched the candy bar up first, claiming finders keepers, only for pigtails to grab it off of me, waving it in the air triumphantly, only for 4 eyes and Batman shirt to form an allegiance, taking it for themselves. I shoved Batman's shirt, and he in turn pulled off my hat and made me cry. Rich girl, who had been wandering around, stepped in. We already knew who Rich girl was. Her parents made more money than the Queen. At least, that's what the rumor was in class. Rich girl was rich, which meant she was either a celebrity or a long-lost princess. In reality, her father, Jason Lockhart, had bought our little coastal town. Rich girl plucked the candy bar from the boys and initiated a truce, splitting it 4 ways instead. It was when she was handing out chunks of chocolate. Did we share our names, grinning at each other with chocolatey mouths. Pigtails was Ariosa. 4 eyes, Harry. Batman shirt was Wylan. Rich girl, Esme. And yellow hat was me. The rest was history, I guess. Following that day, the 5 of us became inseparable. In school, we became an unbreakable clique. As littles, we made our own games and spent countless hours at the beach on weekends playing pirates. It was fun. Those summer days and nights will be etched into my mind forever. A blur of swimming in the sea, eating candy, and sharing stories under a late-setting sun. Esme would regularly invite us to play at her house, which reminded me of a palace. She had 7 bathrooms. Who needed 7 bathrooms? As littles, we made a pact. On the last day of summer vacation before 3rd grade, we declared best friends forever. Then, when we were 12, tipsy on Esme's father's expensive wine and spread out on a picnic blanket, we said it again, giggling under a crescent moon. Best friends forever. It was when we reached high school. Esme started to take our pact a little too seriously. I loved her as much as I loved the others, but she didn't know boundaries. Best friends forever was something a lot different in her mind. It started subtly. When other kids wanted to hang out with us, she was adamant that it was just the 5 of us. We were 14 years old, and in our freshman year of high school, making new friends was inevitable. I invited 2 girls to sit with us at lunch, and Esme immediately stood up, dragging the boys and Ariosa to another table. When I stood my ground and plonked down, refusing to follow them, Esme came over and politely asked me to join her and the others. By now, I was getting odd looks from other kids. Esme was a well-known name across town, and so was my name by default. I was already in way too deep with her family to brush her off. Esme's father had already insisted on paying for my college tuition. I said no initially, though my mother thought it was a great idea. Esme had a habit of throwing cash at us when she thought we were going to leave her. Harry was promised a football scholarship when he showed signs of drifting away to hang out with the varsity team. When Wylan got a girlfriend, Esme surprised him with the guitar he had been saving up for. Ariosa started getting cozy with a classmate, and that classmate's parents suddenly won a lottery I had never heard of and moved away. Initially, she isolated us from other kids, even our family, insisting on weekends away and trips to exotic locations. But we were growing up, and best friends forever was looking progressively less likely. Esme thought our pact was an unbreakable bond, a need to be near each other constantly and be completely isolated from everyone else. Esme thought best friends forever meant we couldn't fall in love, couldn't form relationships. She didn't want us to grow up. In junior year, Harry actually went against her wishes and got a boyfriend. Harry Sullivan liked to experiment behind Esme's back. Having been on several dates with both guys and girls, it was well known that he was a player, even if Esme shot down those rumors. But I think he truly fell for Ben. Opposites attract, and Harry, captain of the varsity team, falling for Ben Sykes, a quiet competitive swimmer, was the best thing that had happened to our group. Harry was slowly rebelling, which gave us the courage to fly the nest too. Initially, Esme didn't react or say anything. In fact, she smiled when Harry awkwardly introduced us, his gaze glued to Esme. He was waiting for her to start screaming, his eyes hard, lips ready to argue, but she didn't. Esme offered Ben a seat. Wylan shot me a look, and Ariosa almost choked on her sandwich. Harry didn't let his guard down, though he politely declined her offer and joined the varsity table instead. Harry Sullivan was slowly but surely moving away from us, away from best friends forever, and our stupid childhood pact. He wanted his own life, his own friends. Ben was the start of that. Again, I was sure Esme was planning something. She forced Wylan's friends to move schools and ripped Ariosa's boyfriend out of town, so it didn't make sense to me why she was letting Harry get away with it. She even restricted us from talking to adults, unless it was our parents. Harry could have limited conversation with his coach, only in school time, and Wylan was only able to join the drama club if he promised to let the rest of us sit in the audience. If that wasn't weird enough, we were permitted to tell her everything, every secret we had, or worry on our minds. Obviously, we didn't. There was no way I was telling her about my late first period, and I was pretty sure the boys would rather die than share their private lives. Sometimes, we didn't have a choice. Esme would lock us in her car and demand every private detail, and it was less exhausting to just spill our guts. I made the mistake of talking to a girl, Emma, at the start of the year. Esme may not have been in all of my classes, but she had spies, kids that were paid a decent sum of cash to make sure none of her friends were socializing. Emma switched classes a day later, and when I tracked her down in the hallway, her eyes widened, like she was frightened. Emma told me to stay away from her, so I did. I didn't have a fucking choice. I should have known the boy watching us gush over TV show crushes was loyal to Esme. I thought she was okay with Harry dating someone. I mean, she didn't throw a screaming fit like usual, which was progress. I was surprised she was actually allowing someone into the group. Esme seemed genuinely happy with Harry's boyfriend joining our group, allowing him to come to hang out at her house and our usual place on the beach. The holidays came around, and Ariosa proposed a Christmas party at her place. I was 2 hours late, after a heated argument with Mom over the car. When I arrived, I immediately knew something was wrong. There was no music, and the lights were off. I did see an attempt at a party, grabbing myself some holiday-themed punch from the lounge. The figure sitting alone in the kitchen caught me off guard. It was pitch black, so I thought it was the ghost of Christmas past, after Esme forced us to watch Christmas movies with her a few days prior. When I clicked on the light, however, an identity swam into view. Ben, judging from the cans scattered on the table, he was maybe 5 or 6 drinks down. Harry's boyfriend regarded me with an almost pitiful smile. "Hey, Thea." His voice was a kind of croak. Ben held up his can in a mocking salute. "Merry Christmas." "Hey." I poured him a glass of water, sitting down hesitantly, my hands wrapped around a glass of punch. "Is everything okay?" "Oh yeah, I'm great." Ben's sarcasm needed work. Harry was a master of irony, so maybe he was rubbing off on him. Ben downed another beer. "I missed a swim meet to come to this stupid party." Ouch. Technically, it was an Esme-centered party, so we were all there against our will. I nodded, sipping my punch. It was kind of spicy. "So, where's everyone else?" Ben met my gaze, his lips curling. "Where do you think?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Did they go out?" I think Ben was waiting for me to give him a reason to find Harry. I couldn't give him one without going against her family and putting myself in danger. The boy scoffed. "Whatever. Thea," he stood up. "Tell that bastard I never want to see him again," he mumbled, staggering out of the kitchen. Ben stopped in the doorway, but he didn't turn around. "You guys deserve each other." He laughed, and something ice-cold prickled its way down my spine. I didn't even wait for Ben to leave, and by the sound of it, he was already emptying his guts in the front hallway. Ignoring him, I forced my legs upstairs, my heart hammering. There was no way. Right, because if Esme had done this, then she had won. The girl had a perfectly calculated plan after all. Esme didn't want Harry to be intimate with anyone else but her. I realized that when I stumbled into a lot of tangled legs and flushed faces under blankets. Wyland told me to turn off the light, but I was too stunned to move. This wasn't what I expected. Esme wanted us as friends, but this was different. This was closer, more intimate, where she could have every part of us, body, mind, and soul. The logical side of my brain wondered if she had become so scared that we would find love and ruin our friendship pact. She immediately wanted us to love her instead, while the not-so-alert part of my brain wanted to entangle myself in their weird foursome sandwich. So, I joined them. I mean, it was cold. The punch was definitely filled with aphrodisiacs to influence guests, and seeing Harry buried under Esme, his legs tangled around Ariosa, I'd say Esme's plan had succeeded. I didn't want to know what Ben saw. Later on, I discovered that he walked in on them, and Harry, fully bewitched by Esme's spell, ignored him. Ben was right. We did deserve each other. Esme had made sure of that. I was feeling a little more than heated, so yeah, I crawled into bed with them. I wanted to believe it meant something, even if I knew deep down Esme was tightening her iron grip. Ever since that night, our relationship became more intimate, which brought us closer together, but we never actually dated. Esme didn't want to date us. She just didn't want anyone else to date us. Most of my junior and senior year was a blur of blindly following orders and watching the light slowly start to fizzle out in my friend's eyes. Esme demanded we move in with her, though luckily our parents stepped in. When she started talking about friendship marriage, I think that was when we decided that we were done. Best friends forever would never continue into college. I was sure of it. Harry was the first to get a football scholarship, halfway across the country. Esme did what she always did. She smiled through gritted teeth congratulating him with a hug. I caught Wyland's fuck look, pretending to choke on his drink. We already knew she was planning something potentially life-ruining. We took bets. Wyland was convinced her father would buy the college itself. Ariosa went down a darker route, saying Esme would burn the campus to the ground. Esme did neither, attempting manipulation more directly. In the days following his announcement, Harry had received 3 anonymous death threats and a stuffed rabbit filled with pig's blood thrown in his locker. When he talked to his parents, they went straight to the police, only to drop the case several hours later after a talk with her dad. Harry said it was like his parents had been hypnotized. Esme turned the whole town against us, so we had no choice but to run back to her. Wyland talked to a girl during gym, and one of Esme's spies immediately reported it. I accidentally smiled at Josh Peake in AP English and received a strongly worded email to not even look at him. Senior year drew to a close, and our only solace was a stupid party on the beach. I made sure to only invite kids who either hated Esme or had offered us their help in the past. They were too scared to turn up. Emily Littlewood said her family could get us fake IDs and out of town. She sent Ariosa a text from an unknown number, only disclosing her name in cryptic code. Emily's parents were in a car crash hours later. Anyone who tried to help us were either hurt or cut out of the picture. We were officially on our own. Presently, I felt sick to my stomach. I got an email from a college I didn't even apply to, congratulating me on my acceptance. The college just so happened to be the one Wyland and Ariosa were accepted into, and of course, Harry was going there too. The letter was stuffed in my pocket, and I was planning on burning it. It was my way of breaking this stupid pact. We were not going to be best friends forever, because in Esme's eyes, she didn't see the 4 of us friends. Esme saw us as trophies, pretty things she could call hers. Fuck that. We built a fire on the beach. Harry pulled out his acceptance letter first, and in our own private ceremony, we took turns throwing them into the flames. I wanted to laugh in relief, but I was too scared to laugh, too scared to smile, constantly looking over my shoulder to see if we were being watched. I started to let my guard down, slumping on the sand to eat charred marshmallows and talk shit, when Esme herself turned up with a crate of beers. Wyland shot me a death glare, because I was usually the one who accidentally exposed our location, but I had been so careful. Ariosa immediately stiffened up, and Harry rolled his eyes, draining the rest of his beer. I think he was expecting it. We had all mutually agreed that Esme and her family were witches. Ariosa's expression twisted with genuine fright, and she panicked, plucking the smoldered remains of our letters from the fire and stuffing them in her backpack. I was sure she burned herself from the way she kept wafting her hand, wrapping her fingers around an icy beer, though she was more scared of getting caught trashing Esme's gift. Luckily, Esme didn't notice, excusing herself for being late. Harry was uncharacteristically snappy, leaning forward in his chair. The boy wasn't even trying to hide his disdain for her. 2 days before, he broke down in my car. It was the only place without a camera, without spies hanging around. Wyland was sleeping in the back, and Ariosa was dancing in his lap. Harry kept it together until I asked him if he was okay, and his body kind of jerked, like he was trembling. He had spent the whole car ride staring into oblivion, his eyes half-lidded, lips curled into an almost maniacal smile. I didn't notice he was clinging onto his seat for dear life, like Esme was going to pop up out of nowhere. I can't do this anymore. He kept saying it again and again and again, until his fingers were clawing at his hair, and he was screaming, his eyes almost feral, like a wild animal. I can't fucking do this anymore. She's going to kill me. I hugged him. It was all I could do. Just a few more weeks, I told him. Then we would be free. How did you know we were here? Harry's eyes narrowed, lips curling. Are you stalking us? Esme. His tone was like warm water washing over me. I thought it might finally push her away. Esme shot him a grin. I always know where you are, she said, ruffling his hair. I was just making last-minute arrangements for something special. Harry wasn't playing around, scoffing through another mouthful of beer. And what's that? He mumbled under his breath. Another death threat. Esme seemed to notice his disobedience, though she didn't say anything, maintaining her wide smile. That's a secret. Harry Saturday, back in his chair, nursing another beer. Weiler nudged him to stop drinking, but he protested with a groan, slurping from the can. I'm sick of being ordered around, he said, downing another beer, as if in protest. I'm gonna do whatever I fucking want. His half-lidded gaze fell on Esme, who had visibly stiffened up. You do whatever the fuck you want, and I'll do whatever the fuck I want. He saluted her with his drink. All right. When Esme didn't respond, Harry threw his empty can at her. The girl didn't even flinch. I'm going to Duke. You psycho sponge. Harry spat, and I caught Weiland's wry smile. Ariosa's expression brightened. Duke was always his first choice. I don't want to go to your fucking college. Esme, I don't want to be anywhere near you or your family. You're a leech. You leech onto people and suck the life out of them. And then throw money at them when they want to leave. What you're doing is borderline psycho. You take everything away from us. When we find friends, you make them disappear. And when we find someone, you throw yourself at us, like a leech. Gulping down beer, he was just getting started. That night with Ben, Harry choked out, You fucked with our heads. He spluttered on a sob, and Harry moved to grab his hand, but he shoved her away, his lips curling into a snarl, angrily swiping at his eyes. No, get off of me. It needs to be said. His gaze flicked back to Esme. You turned my parents into mindless followers of yours, so you could keep me under your control. You manipulate us with money and vacations, and fancy scholarships. I mean, who fucking does that? Huh? What kind of person goes to these kinds of lengths to keep friends? He laughed. You threaten and isolate us, and seriously think we want to be friends. Harry let out a shuddery breath. So, here's what you're going to do. You're going to leave me and my parents alone. The same goes for Ari, Thea, and Weiland. You're going to get your father to fire my parents. And then you're going to get your connections you keep bragging about to cancel the scholarship I don't even want. If you don't, I'll happily contact the police and get your ass thrown in jail for stalking. His smile was harsh, almost manic. When Esme opened her mouth, Harry tipped his head back, dazedly blinking at the sky. Not the police under your dad's thumb, he said with a snort. I'm not fucking stupid. I mean outside of town, where you'll face actual consequences. His eyes darkened. After tonight, I don't want to see your face again. His words were venomous, and I reveled in each one. Find new friends in college, Esme, and pray that they tolerate your psycho bullshit. Harry's voice faded out. The sea suddenly so much louder in my ears, waves crashing onto the sand, before drifting back. And don't put you 6 feet under the fucking ground. Esme seemed frownsome for a moment, and we all waited with bated breath. Was this it? Would she finally leave us alone? Instead of replying, the girl turned her attention away from Harry and plonked herself down on Ariosa's lap, chastising Weiland for wearing a short-sleeved shirt. Esme insisted on styling us, like we were dolls. She hated when Ariosa tied up her hair, and I wasn't allowed to straighten my curls. Harry had to wear contact lenses if he wore glasses. She ignored him for days. When he lost his contacts and had to wear glasses, Esme bought him unlimited contacts. Harry didn't respond to Esme ignoring him, instead cracking open another beer. He shot me a grin, which was a little too wide. Jesus fucking Christ, I remember thinking. He was losing his mind. Mission accomplished. If drunk Harry thought it was mission accomplished, sober Harry was in for a rude awakening. The girl's lack of response wasn't a win, it was a time bomb. Esme started talking about her own college acceptance letter, and I caught him glaring at her, his fingers pulverizing the can. I hated what she was in the process of turning him into. Willen was staying quiet, absently making a mini sandcastle, and Ariosa was snouncing on the sand. The party was primarily to plan a quiet escape, and once again Esme had made it about her. I excused myself, escaping down to the shallows. The silence was a relief. I dropped onto my butt, letting the tide wash over my feet. Sticking my toes in bioluminescent plankton, I wondered how a candy bar had single-handedly ruined my life. Esme was making a fool out of herself again. In the corner of my eye, she was standing with her hands on her hips, blonde curls being whipped around in the wind. Wylan had done something wrong. I had no idea what it was, though from the sound of her voice, it sounded like he'd been hiding a friend. It was when I was watching the sea wash up on the sand. I heard it again. Drilling. It felt close, but also far away. We could just kill her, you know. Harry was standing behind me, swaying slightly, a fresh drink in his hand. He looked like a ghost under a moonlit sky. His cheeks were too pale, dark brown hair glued to his forehead with sweat. He wasn't smiling. Esme said it was his best attribute, so he made sure to never smile around her. I took a moment to drink in how hollow the boy looked, both body and mind, his dark eyes barely focusing on me. Esme had turned him into a shell of himself. Not just Harry. Ariosa had lost that glow to her skin, and I was sure Wylan was going grey at 17. Even looking at myself in the mirror, I was constantly on edge, my cheeks starting to deflate. Turning back to the sea, I pressed my knees closer to my chest. The drilling was getting louder. It felt and sounded closer when I lowered my head, like if I turned at the right angle, I would hear it better. "You have a death wish, idiot," Harry snorted, slumping down next to me and resting his chin on his knees. He reached into his shorts and pulled out a cigarette, lit it up, and took a long drag. The orange glow settled my dancing stomach. "I'm serious," he said, lips curved around the cigarette. "We kill her and dump her body in the sea, then run the fuck away. Problem solved." "Problem still there," I said pointedly. "You just declared war on a psychopath." I shoved him, and he pulled a face, shoving me back. "Since when do you smoke?" Harry's gaze strayed on the ocean, smoke escaping his lips. "Since Ben." His words stung. "Well, what about Esme's dad?" I challenged him, changing the subject. I straightened up, stretching my legs. "We'll have to kill him too." "Right." I could see him trying not to smile around the smoke. "So," I continued, eager to bring back the boy I grew up with, even if it was just for one night. "Psycho sponge." He groaned. It was a good insult in my head. It was a terrible insult. "Did you see Wylan's face?" Harry laughed, and it was a good laugh, one that made me feel safe, despite knowing we were being watched. "We are going to leave here. Don't worry." He shot me a grin. I told her to leave us alone, and Harry arched his neck, twisting around. "I think she got the memo. I hope she has. Anyway." Nodding along, I took in Harry's words, though they were fading in and out. I could hear that noise again. It was real. A loud drilling in the back of my head, looking up at the sky. It was suddenly too black, like an endless oblivion that would never brighten. The sea lapping over my feet felt wrong, somehow, like it wasn't even wet. The sand bunched between my fists was too perfect. Perfect white sand, filtering through my fingers. It was the kind of sand I dreamed of, unlike the actual beach, which was mostly pointed rocks and spiky shells. It was too perfect. I looked around, gulping down air. Ariosa and Wylan trying to get the fire going, and Esme handing out food. The perfect night. The stars twinkling above us. The perfect sky. Harry. My voice sounded wrong, like the words on my lips weren't mine. He didn't look at me. "Yeah. How many times have we had this conversation? 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 How many times have we had this conversation?" Did I say that 5 times? 10, 15, 20. The moon flickered and went out completely. and I fell through the sand, dragged down, 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 down. The drilling was louder, closer, real. I could feel it, a blade pulverizing through the back of my head, screeching blades dragging my thoughts to awareness. I could feel it seeping from me, blood dripping down my face and neck, pooling across the table I lay on. I opened my mouth to scream, but my lips were detached from me, my voice no longer mine. Instead, my mind was suddenly in permanent rewind. I was back on the beach, and this time Harry was smiling. His original words were torn away, that cutting blade slicing its way through my brain. "So here's what you're going to do," his voice echoed, and he jumped up, picking Esme up and spinning her around. "You're going to stay with us, forever, never leave any of our sides. You're a leech. You're the most beautiful girl I've ever met. I want to be with you, Esme, forever. I can't fucking take this anymore. She's going to kill me." This time, I did scream, a raw cry ripping from my throat. I could sense bright light behind my eyes. My wrists were strapped down, my head pinned to a cruel icy surface. Harry's voice continued, clanging in my skull. "I love her, Thea. I love her so much it hurts." It was endless. It never stopped, and my screams died out into whimpers. They didn't even bother sedating me again. I felt everything, every cut and slice, the warmth that glued my hair to my face, and the saw that sheared all of it off. When the white light faded and flashing colors dotted my vision, I finally fell. Thea. When I opened my eyes, I was standing up, no longer on the beach. I stood barefoot in front of an indoor swimming pool lit up in pale blue light. I was so close to the edge, a white dress pooling at my feet, my hands wrapped around a bouquet of flowers. I found myself smiling, even when I reached a trembling hand to my head, where a veil had been forced into place. I stroked my fingers across my scalp, where old stitches had come apart, seeping red, staining the collar of my dress and ruining my hair. When my fingers came back slick red, I swiftly wiped them on my dress, smiling wider. Roses. I clutched the bouquet tighter to my chest. They were Esme's favorite. "Thea, snap out of it." The man's voice startled me, reverberating through the room. I blinked, my vision swimming in and out of view. He was older than me, at least in his mid-20s, thick, brown hair hanging in dark eyes that part of me recognized. The flower crown of white roses sitting on top of his head looked like a joke, a mockery of him. I didn't register the bloody strips of white wrapped around his head or the smear of red staining the front of his suit. Instead, I was choking on a name that shouldn't have matched the stranger. No, not a stranger. Harry Sullivan was not 25 years old. Because if he was 25, then how old was I? I looked down at myself. I still felt 17, and yet I was taller. My dress perfectly fitted to my figure. I was 17, but my body was older, so much maturer, molded and perfected. No. I felt my legs give way, a cry rumbling in my throat. I was going to go to college. I was going to get away from her. How long had I truly been sitting on the beach on the last day of senior year? "Thea, listen to me." His hands found mine, clammy and stained with blood. But it was him. And I wanted to cry, wanted to ask how he had jumped forwards in time, when I already knew the truth. I was in denial, and denial was agony. I moved to wrap my arms around my friend, but he shook his head. "No, don't move," he hissed out. "If you move, she'll know something is up." Opening my mouth, my throat tasted of rusty change. "How long?" I wanted to scream, my chest aching. Harry didn't speak. He didn't explain the strips of white wrapped around his head, or the other's absence. He pressed something into my hand, delving it between the folds of my dress. The knife slid perfectly between my fingers, the blade pricking my skin. I didn't feel anything. "Kill the bitch," he said through gritted teeth. Harry didn't cry. I don't think he could cry anymore. "Do you hear me? he whispered, his voice collapsing into a sob. I wanted to know what had happened to him, what 8 years had done to my best friend. Fucking killer. Thea. The doors flew open, the sound of heels clicking loudly on marble. Harry dropped to his knees, and I straightened up, fashioning my expression back to vacant. I wanted to help him. He couldn't stand up. His head bowed. If I was going to kill her, though, I had to catch her off guard. Esme appeared, a blur of golden curls and fluffy pink. She was noticeably older too. Esme Lockhart was still beautiful, almost breathtakingly so. Her expression may have looked maturer, but that psychotic gleam was still there, twinkling in her eyes. Harry. Her voice was more of a bird-like squawk. I stayed frouncing, watching the girl march over to him, entangling her arms around his waist. You do realize it's bad luck for the groom to see his bride the night before. Harry didn't fight back when she pulled out a silk cloth, wrapping it around his eyes, her hand slipping over his mouth. Esme's lips found his ear, and I heard every word. This was the first time I'd heard her actually scared. Since you're insistent on ruining our perfect day, I want to give you your wedding present early. Esme's voice was silky smooth, sultry. She held him like a toy, rocking him side to side. Harry didn't move, crumpling in her arms. His frenzied eyes found mine. Kill her. Come on, she crooned. Dad is waiting for you. I wanted to kill her right there, before she could drag my friend away. But something snapped in my head, and I was back on the beach. This time the tide was in, and I was sitting alone. Behind me, Esme was the only one sitting by our fire. Thea, she shouted, waving at me to join her. The tide was at my feet, but I couldn't even feel it anymore. There were no stars. Thea, reality was being cruel to me. It wouldn't let me sleep. This time, I awoke under a beautiful blue sky. Above me was a flower arch made of roses. Rows of strangers with wide smiles sitting under trees entangled with lights. Standing on my left was Ariosa. Her red hair was piled on her head, perfectly fitted with a flower crown. Her smile was too wide, intricately made-up eyes half-lidded, and I was sure she had wet herself through her wedding dress. Ariosa wasn't really herself anymore, her gaze penetrating right through me. I could see dark red smearing the top of her head. Neither was Wylan, sculpted in a rich black suit. The boy was unrecognizable, hiding behind a mop of blonde curls and a nose job I knew he didn't need. Wylan had grown up, maturing into a handsome man, but once I was staring at him, I couldn't stop. I glimpsed telltale spots of blood staining his collar. His grin was dazed, drool seeping down his chin. Wylan was standing at an angle, swaying back and forth, that glitter which was my best friend, gone. Thea. I blinked. Esme was inches away from me, the bride. Pay attention. I found myself nodding obediently. In a few simple words, she was going to become my wife. The knife was tucked into my dress. Harry was standing next to me. I didn't want to look at him, because I knew what Esme's wedding gift was. In the corner of my eye, I glimpsed a thin line of black trickling down his temple, scarlet bandages hidden under that hideous fucking flower crown. His eyes were lazily following a butterfly, and he could barely stand still. Harry was the one who tried to get away, who clawed his way out of her control. Esme had decided to take his free will by force. The others spoke their vows, like they had been cemented inside their minds. I, Harry Sullivan, Ariosa Carlyle, Wylan Sutton, Thea Samuels. Take Esme Annalise Lockhart to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until parted by death. Harry blinked, his lips forming a smile. I do. Ariosa giggled all the way through her speech, which was unintelligible. Wylan sealed his vow, grinning through a mouthful of scarlet. I think seeing him is what jerked my thoughts to fruition. She had taken my friends, ripped away their youth, and now took their minds. I think I said I do. The wedding party exploded into cheering, and we were showered in confetti. The officiator turned to me, and I saw bright, intense red. Fuck. I don't even remember moving. 1 second I was standing still, and the next, I was straddling my new wife, stabbing her straight through the throat. I had to cut every order she had ever demanded of us directly from her mouth, parted by death. The officiator's words were ringing in my skull. We were free. She cut into my head and turned me into the perfect wife. She turned my best friends into mindless shells. The wedding party was screaming, and so was I. Help! Blood was slick between my hands, but it felt good. I need help. There was no sign of my parents, anyone I knew. I didn't even see Esme's father. I kicked off my heels and ran. And luckily, Ariosa thought it was a game, following me, grabbing Wylan, knowing that I would regret it if I left him. I pulled a barely responsive Harry along too, who awkwardly stumbled after me. We made it out of the hotel grounds, and I called the police, who immediately sent us to urgent care. I spent 2 weeks in the emergency room, and I got 2 visitors. Emma, from high school, she hugged me, and so did her 5-year-old girl. The second visitor was a surprise. Ben, Harry's old boyfriend who was now a cop, had been tracking us down since our death when we were 17. Apparently, Esme faked our deaths. Ben told me my parents left town a year after my death. He had contacted them multiple times, but no reply. They weren't interested, which was understandable. If someone told me my dead daughter was in fact alive and forced to marry her best friend, I wouldn't engage either. I asked Ben if he'd been to see Harry, and he nodded, his cheeks going pale. He told me the words I didn't want to hear. Harry wasn't Harry Sullivan anymore. The doctors explained it in more medical terms. A foreign object being obstructed through the skull and damaging the frontal lobe or something like that. I wasn't really listening. Ben started talking about serious damage to the brain, and I was on my knees on cool tiles, choking up my lunch. I knew exactly what it was. Harry had been partially lobotomized in a desperate attempt to subjugate him. So, if my friends were lobotomized, what happened to me? I was drilled through the head. I got the same treatment. So, why was I awake and conscious, and they were brain dead? I've been living with Ben for the last 2 years. Ari and Wylan have recovered, in a way. I say in a way because I'm lying to myself. They're completely different people. Wylan is erratic and acts like a child, and Ariosa repeatedly tells me how much she hates me. Their lack of emotion scares me. The doctors are puzzled. They didn't think it was possible to make as much progress as they have. But Jason Song was also using technology that they had never seen before. Ben argued that lobotomies don't control your mind, they destroy it. He was convinced something else was being used, which sent me to sleep for 7 years, forcing my body into autopilot. It would explain Wylan and Ari's behavior too, how they had somehow recovered, or sort of recovered from a lobotomy. Harry spoke for the first time a few days ago. I have a habit of visiting him when Ben isn't guarding his bedside. I wasn't there when he spoke. I was buying soda when Ben stumbled out of the room, vomiting everywhere. Unable to resist, I hurried inside. Harry was sitting up, propped up on pillows. His eyes were so much more alert, which gave me hope, until he opened his mouth. Inclining his head, Harry frowned at me. Ariosa and Wylan have been looking behind me a lot. I thought they were staring into mid-air, but Harry was staring at the exact same spot, just behind my right shoulder. He spoke her name with a glitter in his eye, and I think in his mind, Harry could still see her. And Esme was still the love of our lives. When I shut the door and sat Saturday down, his expression darkened. I hate that I can see so much of her in him, and it terrifies me. Harry was looking behind me, craning his neck. Where did my wife go? I told him she was dead, only for him to laugh. No, she's not, Harry said, like a child acting out. She was just right there. I know Esme can't be alive, but Ariosa and Wylan say the same thing, that she's always standing right behind me, I thought everyone was kidding about Sid. I thought maybe it was an elaborate prank started by my mother, perpetuated by my sister, and reinforced by my grandma, who was always poking fun at him. Your cousin Sid talks to a mannequin on his front lawn. Your cousin Sid collects wigs for his new girlfriend. Your cousin Sid is dating a sex toy. But the photos were what convinced me, particularly the one where Sid winked at the camera as he was kissing a bright white ear, an ear far too shiny and glossy to be human. It was part of a series of photos on Facebook labeled Anniversary. In each one, Sid was situated next to a figure he had blurred out in Photoshop. Him and the figure could be seen kneeling at a picnic, and then seated at a park, and then finally standing at his backyard, overlooking an orange sunset. The blurring had been done to protect her privacy, according to his comments. It was those pictures, posted so brazenly in the eye of the public, that made me worry for my cousin after all. I DM'd to ask what this anniversary was all about, merely trying to be polite. 10 minutes later, I got his response. Sydney: "Hey, good to hear from you, Gabe. This was Isabel and I's 13-month anniversary. We decided to share our most auspicious day with our friends and family as an introduction to our relationship. Me: congrats. I heard you might have been seeing someone. I hope they are nice. Sydney: Isabel is my pure and chosen. We are destined for each other. I sincerely hope the world can accept Is and I's love for each other. Me: glad you found someone. Sydney: I have. I'll be honest, Gabriel. Until I met Yissi, my conception of love was all wrong. I was looking for the wrong thing. I feel like I'm finally mature enough to understand the part of me that has been missing. It's like my whole life has been a dress rehearsal for meeting Yis. And now that I am reborn anew. I have a clear understanding of life, my place in it, and the direction of the future. Isabel has revealed my greatest and truest value to the universe. And with her love at my side, anything is possible. Would you like to meet her? Me: what? Sydney: we've been keeping our relationship low-key, but it's time that she met some of my family. You're the first to reach out. I would really appreciate it if you would visit. Then you could spread word of how amazing she is. It would truly do wonders to help convince my parents to visit Isabel too. Please, would you come visit us? Or Gabrielle? I should mention it did not feel like I was talking to the Sid that I knew. The Sid that I knew talked about Pokemon, Marvel movies and anime I'd never heard of. Sure, he was introverted, and sure, he could have some weird opinions, but he was really just a typically nerdy IT guy who mostly kept to himself. This monologuing and "Oh Gabriel" shit was all new, and honestly it was frightening. I was concerned he'd fallen for some new agey scam or cult or God knows what. So, out of familial obligation, but also morbid curiosity, I decided to agree. I promised I would visit for dinner in a week. It was a breezy hour and a half on the highway. Sid lived about 3 townships away, and as far as I knew, he was still renting that same basement studio space he had always lived in ever since he moved out in his late 30s. I remember how shocked his whole family was. No one thought he had the gumption. No one thought he had the self-reliance. But lo and behold, he had rented a whole 1,000-square-foot studio all to himself. When I pulled up in the driveway, I could see him pop up from around the fence. "Gabe, so glad you could make it." "Hey, good to see you, man." We clasped hands and patted each other's back. Sid was never much of a hugger, so I was surprised how hard he embraced me on this occasion. At first I thought it may have been a veiled plea for help, like he was desperate for something. But as soon as we let go, I saw his face. He was beaming, genuinely overjoyed by my presence. "She's going to be so happy to see you. She is going to love you." I smiled and tried not to be weirded out by the comment. Instead, I revealed the bottle of red and white wine I brought for the occasion. I didn't know which you'd prefer, but I figured options would be, Isabel doesn't drink. Oh, well, that's okay. I also brought non-alcoholic lager that I'm a big fan. Isabel doesn't drink. He looked at me, slightly annoyed, as if I hadn't heard him the first time. I wasn't sure what he meant by the comment, but then, after brief consideration, I believe I understood completely. Right, of course. Isabel just doesn't drink. No, not at the moment. But this is something that may change. I looked at him dead in the eye to get a sense if he was joking about any of this. He wasn't. I left all the drinks in the car. We ventured to the backyard of the house, and there, with a descending stone staircase, I could see his entrance to the basement flat. Please don't mind Isabel's lethargy. She's been busy in the yard all day, so she'll remain seated for the next little bit. I wanted to laugh. This was already sounding so ridiculous, but I also wanted to play along, to see where this was going, so I simply smiled and nodded. As soon as I went through the door, however, my giggles vanished, replaced by a tight constriction in my chest. Sitting across the entrance was a person-sized porcelain doll. She was laying a little ragged, with eyes wide open, black pupils gleaming with a shine I had never seen. Something about seeing a doll that large I found immediately disturbing, as if there was a possibility that maybe a psychopath was hiding inside, pretending to be limp. As you can see, she's a bit zonked. Haha. Sid went over and petted her hair. Both of her eyelids fluttered downwards, like the rocking mechanism in any porcelain doll. She'll be up in a few minutes. Just a quick power nap. Of course, I said, and then darted over to the dinner table, which was littered with Warhammer figures. I seated myself facing away, trying to hide my fear of an oversized toy. So basically everyone was right. Sid is seeing a doll. Good Lord. I'll start heating up the food. He grabbed a store-bought, pre-roasted chicken from his fridge and set it into the oven. His suite was the same disaster I saw when I visited 7 years ago. Soda cans littered everywhere, including on his unmade bed, bobbleheads and Funko Pops standing on every conceivable surface, including the wall-to-wall shelves that made me feel like I was inside some poorly run museum. The place was still very much Sid's, except now he had a giant doll on the couch. So where did you find her exactly? I cut to the point. Sid clicked some dials on his rice maker. Isabel? I met her in the field. The IT field? No, just the big grass field, beyond the yard. I turned to look out his small basement window, although it was lightly fenced off. Sid's yard connected with a large, grassy plain, city property, underground reservoir, I think. So you just found her walking around, on her own, through the grass. Sid Saturday across from me, picking up some Warhammer figures. Yes, well, I was getting out to photograph my Tyranids in the bush, trying to recreate a scene where the Norn Queen summons her underlings to fight the 9th Legion of the Imperium. And before I knew it, some of my figures started to move on their own, like this. He put down a soldier, and I watched as it slid across the table. As if dragged by a magnet, the little space marine ended up by my hand. What does this have to do with Isabel? Then all of my figures started moving, surrounding me in a circle. It was unreal, and when I finally looked up, Isabel was standing there, overseeing everything. I lifted the tiny marine, inspected the underside of the circular base, then dropped it immediately. What the fuck? Beneath the figure's base was a pulsating black ooze, jutting with countless spiky hairs. The hairs grabbed onto the table's surface and pulled the figure upright again. I see you found them. Sid laughed. The micrites. The mic what? Everything in my house has them. Watch. Sid stood up and patted his leg, whistling across the room. Oh, Pip-Boy. A yellow and blue bobblehead skittered across the floor like a demented spider until it was at Sid's feet. He leaned down and gave it a pet. You mind tidying Daddy's bed? The bobblehead bobbled, then it scurried over to the sordid sleeping space. Black gunk tendrilled from beneath the toy's base, entering the empty pop cans and moving them away. Then, like a pair of disembodied hands, the ooze also lifted and folded the covers of Sid's bed. At this point I was standing up by my chair, thoroughly freaked. Are they dot bugs? No. They're a part of Isabel, little essences of her. I turned to the sleeping doll, noticing her head twitch a little. You're saying Isabel is filled with them? No. Isabel is the Mycrites. I moved away from a Gundam figure near the table leg, not wanting to be near any toy whatsoever. I know it's a lot to take in. I was scared at first too. But you see, Isabel is just a person like you or myself. I gave him a look that said, "You've got to be shitting me." Hear me out. Isabel is from a place where they're beyond the need of bodies. She won't say where, but I do know it's somewhere in the Pleiades star cluster. My jaw dropped further. So she's an alien. Not quite. It's more like her consciousness has been uploaded to a colony of nanomachines. She's a person whose thoughts are now in a liquid robot that arrived here hundreds of years ago. Both my hands glued themselves to the top of my head. It was the most incredulous I had ever felt. Okay, you keep calling her a person, but all I've seen is black ouncy around your house. She's very much a single entity. The majority of the Mycrites inhabit that porcelain body. She's attached to it. And can you blame her? It's gorgeous. 19th century China, I think. As he said the words, I could see the doll begin to stir. Her arms lifted above her head. Was she stretching? I backed away, instinctively heading for the door. I was halfway there when Isabel suddenly stood up on 2 feet and stared at me. I frowned. As far as I could tell, her head and limbs were made of porcelain, but her torso and joints were made of soft fabric. Like any old Victorian doll, there must have been bucketfuls of those Mycrites inside, filling her with the muscle and sinew she needed to lift, move and blink at me with those glassy, cold marbles. Gabriel Worthington, her mouth lowered and lifted like an antique puppet's. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you." I was too afraid to turn my back now. My eyes were glued. "Won't you be joining us for dinner? I've heard so much about you." Her voice sounded like what sand might sound like if it learned to talk. "Dinner? Yeah. Ding." Sid walked over to his rice maker and gave a thumbs up. "How glorious. The rice is ready. I'll get the cutlery." You might think I Saturday at the dinner table because I was still curious, and that I was still trying to help my cousin by learning more about this otherworldly partner, by understanding their relationship. But that was not the case. I Saturday at the dinner table because I saw a shadow drip off the ceiling and pool around the doorknob of the exit. I could sense that Isabel perhaps may not let me leave, that Isabel perhaps really wanted to have dinner with me, and that Isabel was someone I should work very, very hard to appease so that I could leave with my life intact. "So," Isabel said, dividing up the chicken, "Sid tells me you are married. Why couldn't your wife join us?" I looked at Sid, who didn't seem to notice the question. He was grabbing Cokes from the fridge. "Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Valerie is really behind on work, so she sadly couldn't make it." Isabel's glossy hands had articulated fingers. With each of her movements, I could hear the porcelain scrape on itself. She used tongs to pluck some of the chicken pieces and lay them on my plate. "That is a shame. Does your wife often disappoint you?" I stared at the meat on my plate and at the deadness of her pupils. "No, not at all. I love her very much. She just gets busy with her job." Isabel doled out the rice next. It was very eerie to watch a doll set the food. 2 large portions for the humans and a tiny portion for herself. Sid tells me that he's had many women disappoint him and that it's quite common in this day and age, an epidemic. I watched Sid as he handed me the Coke and smiled a little sheepishly. "Well, I just think girls are a little too picky, maybe a bit mean." He swept some Warhammer off his chair before sitting down. "None of them are as understanding as you, yes." He leaned over and gave her a kiss on her white, shiny ear. I shuddered internally. "Do you think that's true, Gabriel? Are women disappointments?" I had no idea what kind of answer she was seeking. For the record, I don't think women are disappointments, but I wanted to be diplomatic because I got the sense she was siding with my cousin. "Everyone's experience with relationships is different," I said. "Some people just have bad luck." Isabel brought a chicken piece up to her puppet mouth and lowered her jaw, revealing a tangling mass of Mycrites. Downsins of tiny black spikes skewered the meat and pulled it into her dark maw. "And do you know any of these people with bad luck?" she asked. chicken dissolving inside her throat. As a matter of fact, I did. Working in construction, I was surrounded by men who would voice their dissatisfaction with the fairer sex. Though to be honest, most of these men just needed to grow up or stop acting like assholes for these problems to go away. Yes, I know a lot of guys like this. You do. Isabel's eyes lit up. Something in her chest whirred. If this dinner was about placating this doll, this seemed to be the right track. Yeah, I said. It's prevalent at my work, in the trades. Isabel stood up from the table, mimicking the movements of a person rather uncannily. She picked up a box lying near Sid's TV and brought it over to me. It was filled with Hot Wheels, action figures, Warhammer, and other collectible toys. Please, she said, you must offer these men anything they want from this box, whatever they want. Sid took a sip of his soft drink, eyeing his paraphernalia. But yes, those are pretty rare. I was arranging those for eBay. Isabel's hair began to lift and flutter a little, as if filled with static, as if a large charge of micrites had entered her head. I could tell Sid was as uncomfortable with this sight as I was. I make you feel happy, don't I, Sydney? My cousin wiped his mouth and practically bowed. Yes, yes, of course, Isabel. You're my pure and chosen. Then don't you think other men deserve to feel happy too? The dinner only lasted about an hour. Isabel made me promise that I would place the box of toys at my work, which I agreed to. It seemed like a fair price to pay for allowing me to leave alive. I told everyone in my family that Sid was very content with his new partner, and after much consideration, I also told them the truth, that his partner was indeed a doll. Sid just does what makes himself happy. Let Sid be Sid, I said. This resulted in the expected shock, embarrassment and ridicule between family members. No one wanted to contact my cousin after learning that, not anytime soon anyway, which I think was a good thing, because it protected Sid from humiliation. But more importantly, it also protected anyone else in my family from meeting Isabel, which was my real intention. I have no clue what sort of microbial slime tech Isabel was made of, or where in the universe she was from, but I certainly didn't trust her in the slightest. The burden I now carry is that I exposed some employees to her essence at my company. I left those colorful, valuable-looking collectibles in the lunchroom portable at my work site. I wish I could tell you they were harmless cars, Transformers and He-Man toys, but even on my drive home, I could see the shimmering black micrites hiding inside all those plastic playthings. I don't know what Isabel intends to do with the additional men she will ensnare. For all I know, she has other porcelain bodies to act as spouses. She might be enthralling hundreds of males to enact something awful, something truly horrific. But I'm secretly hoping they all just fall in love, keep to themselves, and play Warhammer or something. I wish I could say that my parents' death had meaning, that they died for a good reason, but they didn't. I was only 11 years old at the time. A drunk man racing home to try catch his wife cheating blindsided them on a turn. My parents didn't die heroes. They didn't die for a grand purpose. They died because someone took them from me too early. This was the first time I felt real, raw grief. The memory of when I was told, the moment it happened, is snapshot in my mind like a burn that never heals. The way my gut sank like the dip of a monstrous roller coaster. The pit left as my child self realized the permanent nature of it. I can even still feel the tingles in my fingers as the shock kicked in. The words played in real time, but my body felt slowed. Breathing became manual as my vision tilted over and over. I was not emotionally ready for this. I was barely emotionally handling school, so them being taken so callously left me empty for longer than I'd like to admit. After their passing, my grandparents moved into my parents' home with me. They packed up their lives and tried to pick up where my parents left off. 4 years they tried to connect with me, but I was emotionally unstable. I resented them for trying to take their place. Their love hurt me in ways they couldn't win. They tried to coddle me during and after the funeral. For 4 years they tried to break down my walls, but the walls I built held strong. I sank myself into the last connection I felt I had with them games. My father was a software engineer, so he spent a lot of time on the computer, and to my mother's dismay, he dragged me into the digital world early on. I couldn't get the hang of using a mouse and keyboard. I think my hands were too small at the time, so he bought me a console. We would huddle around the TV and play all the best coop games he could find. While snooping for presents one Christmas, I even found a stack of games magazines, red marker circles around games that specifically mentioned local co-op. This is how he always managed to find the perfect game for us every time. I skimmed over this in the moment, having not found the presents they hid so well. But looking back, my heart breaks knowing how much care he put into this hobby of ours. However, there were times I'd catch him playing games on his own. He was a PC gamer born and bred, so that was where I'd find him playing solo, but he never seemed to put the same energy into finding new games to play. Rather, I'd always see him playing games of pixels and numbers, simulation games from his era of gaming. I'd ask to play too, but he'd always tell him I was too young for these kinds of games, and that when I was older, he'd show me how to play them. This always welled mixed feelings of annoyance in the moment, and anticipation for that time to come. But eventually games lost their luster, no matter how much I played, trying to honor them in my mind. I was now playing solo. Not seeing the screen split with another player alongside me was a constant reminder of the pain. I was almost exclusively brought up on split-screen co-op experiences. I was never into playing without my dad, but that's when it hit me. My father would play solo, but he'd play those weird pixelated simulation games. I had it in my head that to enjoy those types of games would make me the adult I idolized him as. But I didn't know where to start. He never talked about them, saving that for a time that would never come. His computer was locked behind a password that was lost forever, so I had to find these games myself. So I took to the best resource I knew of to solve the greatest mysteries on Earth, Google. I put in buzzwords of what I could remember: simulation games, indie, single player, old, and pressed search. These words were not very specific, so it yielded a wild variety of stuff, and after hours of scouring each page, I found a forum post about a game someone had made. Even though it was made in recent times, the screenshots they used to advertise it had that retro style I was looking for. But it wasn't just how it looked. Something else drew me to this game above all the others that had a similar vibe. Its name, Family Simulator. It boasted an extensive game system that you had to manage to keep up an ideal family, something I wouldn't have gone for, opting to lean towards shooters. But it was this dichotomy that made me take the plunge. The instructions were fairly simple for my first time, not just popping in a disk. It ran through an exe file that did all the decisions for me. As the green bar filled, and a sudden wave of emotions overcame me. My father had always kept me from these kids of games, always thinking I'd prefer the modern titles he kept up with, so this really felt like a chance to connect with him, post-mortem, no matter how little it was. I launched the game. Initially I was met with a black screen, and then a studio logo screen. An image of a heart came up, alongside the words Famco, most likely the game creator trying to get their name out there. Nothing flashy or significant, but charming for something probably made by one person. The title screen faded, followed by a basic text box, a little line flickering, beckoning me to start writing. The question was simple: tell me about your life. I thought for a moment. I had been asked this a lot, by counselors, my grandparents and kids that never cared about me before that heard the news. A gesture I just dismissed at face value with a blunt, "I'm fine." They should have known the answer, so I felt insulted each time I was asked. After a while, my grandparents were withdrawn about asking this, seemingly respecting my decision of maintaining distance, and yet, for some reason, that frustrated me. But looking back, I had never truly thought about the answer above a simple no, much less answered it honestly. I had kept all of this inside, and it finally bubbled up to a point, the straw that broke the camel's back. I started typing. All the frustration, sadness, envy, jealousy, all of it was being shoved into this game. Time blurred while I hashed out my rant. I was putting my soul into this answer for the first time ever. It felt silly, even in the moment, knowing it was going at it into some indie game of pixels and text. I didn't know why I was giving this game so much information about myself, but it felt good to get these feelings out somewhere where I knew I couldn't be judged. I could just say my piece, and not hear hollow rhetoric about hope and healing, and it felt good. The black text box, a silent listener that I needed, something that wouldn't pity me, but would just listen. I hadn't even gotten into the game and I was exhausted. I had typed out everything I missed about my parents, how I dearly missed the meals my mother would make, my father taking me out to a field just to throw a ball around, how he'd show me neat tricks that would have me belly laughing, the way he would get up 5 hours before any of us to tell us that he woke up early, only to go back to sleep a few minutes after informing us. I missed staring at the watch I gifted my mother, with my dad's help of course, that my mother adored when we went out for a special occasion, the way they treated me, how much I loved them, how much I missed loving them. Every single minute detail was handed over. The game accepted the information with a satisfying ding sound, and I was sent to another menu, this time character creation. Now, I've never been the creative sort, so I blatantly just named myself Alex, set brown hair and brown eyes, a simple white t-shirt and jeans. I was also prompted with adding personal details, like my birthday, number of friends, and my likes and dislikes. What I didn't expect was the choice of a family. It wasn't as in-depth as the character creation itself, only a couple of presets. Preset 1 was a woman with red hair, a simple crop top and some shorts, the man not too dissimilar from my own outfit. Preset 2 was, well, they looked like my parents. It sounds crazy, but it just felt like them. The models were just a mashup of simple pixels, but they carried so many of their characteristics I grew to recognize in them. The jovial look my mother wore on a near constant basis, my father's stoic stature that exuded the confidence that he was always trying to pass on to me. It was uncanny. I was at a bit of a loss. I knew I missed them, but I didn't realize how much I still missed them, even after 4 years. I mean, for a second I had been convinced that these were my parents in some way. The game was something I was looking to sink some time into as a distraction, but now it fully captured my attention. I accepted all the settings, and the game loaded up. It played a scenic shot of the house, before fading to me in a room with the family. But as soon as I spawned in, I was shook with a loud bang. I jumped in my seat a little, and my heart raced at the fright. Alex, go to sleep. You have school tomorrow. Those games are going to make you sick. It was my grandmother on the other side of my door. I always had my door locked, so this was how she would communicate with me. I checked the time and it was already 2 a.m. As much as I hated to admit it, she was right. But sleep didn't come easy, with my curiosity swirling around my head about this new game. Perhaps I was mistaken, but the thing I had seen as the game had just loaded in was too much to be a coincidence. Surely, it couldn't have been a mistake. The setting was a near-perfect rendition of the house I grew up in, the house I was in right now. The more I thought about it, the more excuses I made to cope. How had the game replicated these things so perfectly? But it was the room that was what I couldn't explain. I saw a dining room, but the details were too familiar. The shade of wood on the square dining table, the layout of the cabinets, the door that led to the kitchen. It was almost entirely the same. It could have been coincidence. My house was a common suburban build, with similar layouts in the rows of houses near me. But it was the layers of coincidences that had me stumped on an explanation. I breathed a sigh of relief as I realized that I was the one that handed details over. Perhaps I really had given the game too much information. This thought didn't entirely settle me, but it eased my mind enough to get some sleep. I rose out of bed with a heavy groan. I looked over at my clock and bolted awake, seeing that I missed my first alarm. I quickly got up and rushed my morning routine. As I boarded the bus, I prepared mentally for another grueling day of education. School was meant to be an escape. At least that's what I was told. A place where you kick back with your friends and get into little adventures, all while building your future. For me, though, that couldn't be further from the truth. I was an outcast, no small fault of my own. and I refused to socialize. I couldn't. When I started high school, it was not long after the incident. My only thought was, if only I could speak to them one last time. This floated in my head as my peers attempted to make conversation with me. By the time I realized I had made myself a loner, the cliques were formed, and I was labeled as a quiet, weird kid, a prime target for harassment. Arriving at class, I was reminded of the grim reality I was facing, the thing I had dreaded for a week: group assignments. I attempted to weasel myself into a group, but of course, Jonathan and his buddies ensured that I would achieve no such thing. The truth was that Jonathan was just as insecure as I was, but the difference was that he projected his much louder than anyone else, and I was the conduit for his emotional baggage. The teacher saw me alone and exclaimed that whoever had no group would take a test instead. He spoke like he was talking to the class, but it was obviously just about me. I sat in the corner in the classroom, away from everyone else, but instead of getting on with the test, I started to dwell on the game again. I could easily chalk everything down to coincidence, but what if it wasn't? Could I speak with them again? The notion was absurd. Thinking my parents were somehow in that game was an impossibility, but with so much unresolved, there was an irrational part of me that wanted to believe it was true. I bombed the test with how distracted I was, and school couldn't end any sooner. But I knew it wasn't over yet. Jonathan had a knack for finding blind spots from authority. Somehow he'd always catch me alone, despite my best attempts at staying within eyeshot of people, though this sometimes didn't even help when other kids would just turn a blind eye to his outbursts. The only constant was me. A slap here, a slap there. I had learned to ignore them, but in my already emotional state, I ran crying. When I got home, my eyes had already run dry. As I entered through the front door, my grandmother greeted me. "How was school today, honey?" she soothed. Despite her soft tone, the sadness quickly turned to frustration. I shrugged her off with a blunt, "'S fine," and I ran past her. Rushing past the kitchen, a glint caught my eye. A watch. I didn't have time to check. I needed to get back on the game. I slammed my door shut and latched the bolt. I booted up the game and loaded in. It was me, in my own house, with my parents, and it was everything I had always wanted. My pixelated character walked over to my mother, and as I got close to her, a black square appeared. Press enter to interact. "How was school today, honey?" popped up, followed by a box I could type in. This question again. I had grown to hate this question. The people that asked this never seemed to actually care about my well-being, more so just going through the motions of conversation. But I felt safe opening up in this game. The disconnect helped me disassociate from judgment before, so I wanted to try it again, even if just to vent privately. This is where the game became my escape. Another reality where everything was as it was always meant to be. Jonathan keeps bullying me. The kids in the class despise me, and I can't even muster up the effort to stand up for myself, because in all honesty, it's the path I chose. I miss you, Mom. I wish you were here to guide me, to comfort me. As soon as I sent the message, she instantly responded. "I see, sweetie. Mom is here for you. Your father and I missed you so dearly," the NPC responded. I felt warm. Those were the words that I had been craving. A craving that my grandparents, no matter their efforts, could never satisfy. The dialogue option disappeared, and with it, so did my ability to interact with her. A sadness lingered over the fact that the interaction was so short, but I wanted to see more. I decided I would take some time and explore the house, and maybe see if I could interact with the father too. I walked down the corridors of my childhood home towards my father's office. A prompt appeared, asking me if I wanted to knock on the office door, and I accepted. He called to come in, and the screen faded out, and back into us in the office. In reality, it was now a room full of boxes still unpacked from my grandparents moving in. But here, the room was back to life. My father sat at his desk, which spanned the majority of the small office's width. This time, the conversation began without a need for me to initiate any prompts. The words of my NPC father flashed across the screen. "Hey, champ. Everything all right?" No text box came up for me to type in. Instead, this time I was met with two choices. Yes, no. After the talk with the mother, I was feeling a lot better, so I chose the first option. "That's great to hear, Champ," he responded. This made me smile. Though he would cycle through nicknames and titles to call me, Champ was sometimes one of them. It might have been added as a cliché, but even as a coincidence, it still made me happy. Then, the NPC asked me if I wanted to play ball with him. Even though I knew it was all virtual, there was still a small excitement at the idea of playing ball with my dad again. The screen faded to black, and we were in the yard. We passed the ball around for a few minutes, the game looking like nothing more than a PowerPoint presentation animation, but in its own way, it was endearing. Sleep came easier this time. For the first time in recent years, I was fulfilled, as if I had felt parental connections again, even if only virtually. Still, some unease set in as I contemplated the legitimacy of the interactions I just had, if they were simply the execution of basic code or something more. In the moment, I was absorbed with trying to connect to my parents, but lying in bed, I was debating whether feeling satisfied emotionally from a bunch of pixels was healthy. The next morning, as I rushed through the house to catch the bus, I noticed my father's office door was slightly ajar. I'm not a superstitious person, but that room was not in use by my grandparents or myself. It was, for all intents and purposes, a storage room. I gently pushed the door open, and the first thing I noticed was that the boxes had been rearranged, as if whoever had moved them needed space for something. Then I saw it. A ball laying in the middle of the room. The moved boxes could be explained away, but the ball being there made my head spin with questions. It looked uncanny to the one I'd just seen in the game. Not identical, but too close to be written off. The call from downstairs had me pull away from the scene. I was already running late, and the bus wouldn't wait forever. I gave the room one more look before leaving, the snapshot replaying in my head the whole day at school. Another arduous day of school, more isolation, more pointless assignment, more Jonathan. Getting home couldn't come any faster. When I got home, I tried going straight to my room, but was stopped. My grandmother deliberately placed herself in the way of the stairs, making sure I couldn't get past without hearing what she wanted to say first. "Alex, we're worried about you. We thought giving you space to heal would help. But every day you just shut yourself in your room. I know you miss them. We miss them too." My grandfather stepped around the corner and joined her side. He wasn't on his feet much in his age. Having waited for my grandmother to start as he joined, "How can you know how I feel? You're not my parents," I yelled back, my emotional bottle bubbling. To my surprise, this didn't elicit anger from my grandparents. Rather, their faces turned soft. "Look at us. We're old. You don't think our parents are gone too? But you're forgetting something. They were your parents, sure. However, they were our kids, our daughter and son-in-law. We loved them, and every day we hurt without them too," my grandmother soothed. "We raised them good, and we can raise you good. You just have to let us in," my grandfather added. I soaked in what they said, but I closed it off. It wasn't the same. It would never be the same. So with my eyes welling, I just ran to my room and locked myself in. After sulking on my bed, I was left with silence. I hated being with my thoughts, so I turned to the noise I used to drown them out. The game. It loaded in, and I was back with my family. My mother greeted me, and I welcomed this much better than how I felt cornered earlier. However, instead of a conversation, she simply told me to wait where I was. So my character Saturday at the table. My father came in and said some comments about work, something he'd always do, regardless of if I understood what he was talking about or not, but I didn't mind. It was always nice to hear him talk. Soon my mother came back in. Her outfit had changed, a more fancier apparel. Instead of normal house clothes, she wore a red dress, and her hair was made up into a bun. Her arms were bare, which is how I spotted something that stood out. In the game, it looked like a few red pixels, with a yellow dot in the middle, unmistakably a watch, and my heart was in my throat. It was uncanny to the watch my father and I gotten her for her birthday. Red band, with a gold face. It really was them. My eye balled hard trying to take this in. "We have a surprise for you," she said, and I knew what it was before I saw it, because I smelled it. The smell of cake wafted in, and I instantly recognized it. A Black Forest gâteau. The cake she always made me for my birthday. In the game, she pulled it out and set it on the table, candles already set on top. I checked the date on the bottom right, and completely forgot what day it was. I hadn't celebrated my birthday since they passed. My grandparents tried to, but I always dismissed it. It was hard to think of my birthday as a celebration without my parents. A jingle played to the tune of the birthday song, and confetti flew around the room. My parents looked elated as my character blew out the candle, something I wouldn't have been able to do in my current heaving state. But the smell lingered longer than I'd thought. At first I thought it was my emotions getting the better of me, but there was in the unmistakable smell of cake in my room. "Happy birthday, son," they both exclaimed. "We want to take you out for your birthday." "Our treat," my mother said. "Pick any place you want." "Where do you want to go?" Dad asked. A text box appeared, prompting me to type in an answer. I contemplated the answer. My first thought was KFC. I know it's cheap junk food, but for some reason it was a bit of a family tradition, though it might have been an indicator of our financial status. But I thought about it more, deeper than what the game was asking me. Where did I truly want to go? Well, the answer would be to be with my parents. So I typed in the place that everyone had told me where they went. Heaven. That's a wonderful choice. "Son," they exclaimed. "Grab your things, son. Let's go there," my dad said. Then the screen faded to black, then crashed. My heart raced. No, I muttered to myself, ad nauseum. I slapped the side of my monitor, knowing damn well it wouldn't do a thing. I was so close. My heart was set on the idea that I'd somehow see them again. But in the silence, I started to think about it. What if this was something they were telling me? The last thing they were telling me. That, like the game, to get to where I needed to go, something had to end. Life. Life is what needs to end to get to heaven. The place I wanted to be with them. I looked around my room, then remembered something. When they passed, I snuck into my dad's office and took his old letter opener, a trinket he'd show off to me to open mail. He'd sometimes let me use it myself, which my mother didn't approve of. It was too sharp for a child to be playing with, but as I slid it out of my drawer, hidden away from my grandparents, I looked at it. Would it get the job done? I put it down. This was ridiculous. I tried to talk myself out of it, but each rationality was answered with retorts. I was unhappy. I had no friends. I had no family. I was alone, so why not join them, even if it didn't work? It would put me out of my misery. I stared at the blade in deep thought, and was ripped out of it with a loud bang. "Alex, can you get out here? Please?" It was my grandmother on the other side of the locked door. The shuffling footsteps I could hear catching up must have been my grandfather. They had no idea what I was up to. There was no way for them to know, so they must have been just bothering me. My eyes returned to the knife once more, the thoughts coming back. Yet I was ripped from it yet again with bangs. More of them this time. "If you don't want to come out, can you at least let us in?" This was new. They never tried twice. The door acted like a voicemail. They'd say their message, then leave me to respond to it or not. "Let us in." Those words lingered in my head. I always went to them, but I never let them in. This was my space I'd carved out for myself, and I used it to keep everyone out. This was the choice I had. Go through with the plan to see my parents, or see what they wanted, and it was the hardest choice of my life. The silence of the room weighed down on me, and my breaths shallowed. Could I make it quick? How painful would it be? Would I actually see them? But the lingering thought was if I could do it with my grandparents on the other side of the door. So I went with my second option, to see what they wanted. I hid the knife, and slowly unlocked the door. Stood outside with my grandparents, big grins on their faces. "Happy birthday, Alex," they said, enthused. I didn't know how to respond, and they continued. "I know you don't like to celebrate, but we have something special for you. Come with us," my grandmother said. So I did, my mind too foggy to do otherwise. They led me to the kitchen, and in the middle sat a cake, an exact replica of my mother's Black Forest gâteau. This opened me up. What? How? How did you? Why? I was too stunned to form a question, too many of them flying through my mind. Remember, Alex, she had to learn it from somewhere. Making this cake for your mother was a tradition that started with me. She said, proudly. I got something for you too, Alex. My grandfather wheezed, the walk from the stairs taking the wind out of him. He hobbled over with a box, wrapped in a red ribbon. I looked at it, not having any idea what they could have gotten me. They didn't know me, not in a personal way to not get me something generic. But I couldn't not open it with them watching me, so I slipped the ribbon off and looked at what was inside. It was something that made my head light from shock, needing to have to sit down after seeing it. It was a watch with a red strap and a gold face. My mother's watch. Is this? I started, not having the energy to finish asking. Yes, after the investigation, police held onto it for evidence. It took a while to get it back, but when I did, I had it restored to give you on a special occasion, my grandfather answered. I have something else too, my grandfather added. He pulled his arm from behind his back and pulled out the ball I'd seen in the office, like the one my dad used to have when he played with me. I've been practicing some tricks in the old office. Bet you didn't notice. I'm not as good as your old man, but he showed me some of the basics, he smugly announced. He twirled it around and tried to catch it as it span, but it caught his knuckle at a funny angle and bounced wildly away, almost hitting the cake. My grandmother's friendly demeanor dropped as she shot him the dirtiest look at almost ruining the cake, which made me do something I thought I'd lost the ability to do. I laughed. It poured out of me, years of pain leaking as joy took its place. Here they were. They were not my parents, nor could they be. However, they knew that and loved me all the same. They were never trying to replace them. They were just picking up where they left off. And I realized that I didn't have to be alone. And from then on, I always let them. I first discovered the wreck a week ago, and I pray to God that I am strong enough to never return to it again. Already, I can feel something urging me to go back. I'm a good man, and will do my best to resist the temptation. I know already that it will not be easy. What was all that about? Said Sarah as we loaded our scuba gear into the back of our old pickup truck. I grinned, flexing my muscles playfully. There is something down there. Oh, please, you're not trying to pull one over on me, are you? Her gaze lingered on my chiseled physique, a testament to years spent working in the dive industry as an instructor and course director. I'm not kidding. There really was something. A submarine. Sarah raised her eyebrows and began peeling off her figure-hugging wetsuit, and I could not help but notice the admiring glances of a couple of younger passing tourists. I'm sure she was aware of their lustful glances. She exudes an effortless sensuality, and exposing her tanned skin and skimpy bikini does not seem to bother her in the slightest. Stop kidding around. We have dived this spot 100 times at least. You know as well as I do that there is nothing down there. But she was wrong. It had begun as a usual Saturday for us, diving together as we often do. Sarah is not only my girlfriend, but also a talented photographer whose stunning images have graced the pages of international magazines. Her skill and professionalism have won her countless awards, and today she was intent on getting some shots of an invasive mantis shrimp species that had started to become more common in the azure waters around the Maltese coast. As we descended into the water, Sarah immediately began searching for the shrimp. She knew where they were likely to be found, but the search process was tedious. I followed along dutifully, watching her graceful form move through the ocean like a mermaid. However, after 10 minutes of this slow-paced exploration, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed a little more excitement. So I signaled to Sarah that I was going off on my own for a bit, and she gave me a playful wink before continuing with her search. As I swam away, I looked back and couldn't help but admire how she moved through the water effortlessly and gracefully. She was more than capable of taking care of herself in these shallow depths, but sometimes I couldn't resist the urge to protect and watch over her from a distance. As I descended into the familiar waters, the sun shimmered through the crystal-clear ocean, casting undulating diamond-shaped patterns upon the enormous blocks of rock littering the shallows. I gently finned over the lip off the drop-off at 20 meters and looked down. My attention was immediately drawn to a large, dark shape that seemed to lie upon the sandy bottom at perhaps 30 meters, like a giant guardian of the depths. My heart raced with excitement as I moved closer, and my eyes widened in astonishment as I realized what the object could be. Without hesitation, I swam deeper, eager to investigate this unexpected discovery that filled me with a sense of both euphoria and fear. The German U-boat had presumably lain undisturbed upon the seabed for over 70 years, a haunting reminder of the past. Its once sleek and deadly exterior was now rusted and covered in algae, giving it a strange, ghostly appearance. As I dove towards it, a feeling of unease settled in my stomach. What tragic circumstances had led to its sinking, and what secrets were hidden within its flooded confines? At a depth of 30 meters, I would get through my air fairly quickly, and I also had limited time if I wanted to avoid decompression stops. But my curiosity prevailed, and I swam towards the stubby conning tower. Only then did I start to worry that the sub might contain dead bodies. What had happened to the crew? Had they been able to escape? Or was their final resting place within the flooded confines of this steel sarcophagus? I know now that I should never have done what I did, but I could not stop myself. An overwhelming urge gripped me, and I peered through the open hatchway into the mysterious and dark interior of the wreck. Later, when I returned to Sarah's side, she was still absorbed in taking photographs and hardly acknowledged my return. Excitedly, I grabbed her arm and shook it, trying to get her attention. She gave me an annoyed look as I thrust my dive slate in front of her mask. After much signaling and insistence, she only read what I had hastily scribbled on its surface in pencil. I found a wreck. Understandably, she looked surprised, as we knew there was no known wreck within 5 miles. Slightly begrudgingly, she followed me towards the drop-off. I was leading and kept looking over my shoulder to ensure Sarah was still following. I could hardly contain my excitement as we swam over the ledge and looked down. Sarah gave me what I would call one of her looks as I stared down at the seabed in disbelief. The U-boat had vanished, but there was something there. I saw it. I told Sarah later as we drove back to our apartment. "You thought you saw something," she corrected. "Maybe you were just knocked. It looked pretty deep." "I suppose that could be it," I said. All the problems with Jurgen and the dive school must be getting to me. She smiled and ran her hands through her salty blonde hair. "I'm thinking of taking a long shower when we get back," she said nonchalantly, before shooting me a suggestive glance from underneath her lashes. "And you should join me. You really could use some stress relief." We both could. Sarah put the radio on, and we drove back to our beachside apartment. She sang along beautifully and harmonized with the songs on the radio, and I lost in anticipation of what was promised to come. As we pulled into the driveway and I killed the engine, Sarah hopped out of the pickup and headed for our apartment. "Come on, slow. Coach, let's wash off all that dried up salt together," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but vibrant with promise. "Perhaps we can find our kind of adventure in the depths of all that shower steam, shall we?" I grinned and followed her into the apartment. I did not mention that I had peered down the hatchway into the flooded submarine, or that I had explored its darkness. All the problems I'm now experiencing with my dive school started about 5 years ago. As the price of exotic destinations dropped and more unique scuba diving destinations became available, my business slowed down. My customers seemed to have been lured away by the white, powdery beaches and waving palm trees of places like the Caribbean, the Maldives, and even Papua New Guinea. It was getting so bad that I swore that I would strangle the next diver I heard mouth that well-worn phrase, "The Med is dead." Eventually, Last year, against my better judgment, I took on a partner, Jürgen. He offered to buy half of my business and bring in lots of extra customers through his network of dive clubs in his native Netherlands. It seemed like the perfect solution at the time. To begin with, things went very well. After spending so many years of hard work building up my dive business by renovating an old derelict building on the coast, adapting a fishing boat, and paying for expensive advertising in glossy dive magazines, I was suddenly able to relax a little and let my partner take some of the strain. This turned out to be a mistake. Before long, almost 8% of our customers were from the Netherlands, and I was getting hardly any bookings from anyone else. Even when I did have some of my own customers, I got the feeling that they were less than happy that the dive trips were dominated by Jürgen's customers, who all seemed to know each other. Not too long after, Jürgen came to me insisting that he should get more than 50% of the profits, as he was bringing in most of the customers. We argued about this constantly, and it even got to the stage where he threatened to sell his share of the business to another acquaintance of his and take his divers elsewhere. 2 weeks ago, Jürgen announced that he wanted to buy me out. After all these months of bickering, I was on the verge of accepting the less than fair market price he had offered me, but that was before I discovered the wreck. The day after I found the mysterious U-boat, Jürgen took a boatload of his customers to one of the local dive sites. Sarah was planning to review the digital shots of shrimp and edit some other work, but the deadline was rapidly approaching. Her little hobby, as she had termed it a few years ago, had become a real success. "Have a great day at the dive school," she said, giving me a quick kiss before hurrying off to the room she used as her office. I had no intention of telling her what my actual plans were. An hour later, I was passing over the underwater ledge and looked down. The wreck was there, just as it had been when I first found it. A hauntingly dark silhouette set against bone-white sand. I had not imagined it. The wreck really did exist. This time, I made sure that I was suitably equipped to allow myself a thorough examination of my discovery. As wrecks go, it was rather odd. It sat upright on the bottom, its ship-like bow slightly buried in the sand. I swam around it but failed to find any obvious damage, making me wonder whether the crew had deliberately sunk it. It just sat there, on the bottom, as if silently waiting, hidden in the depths, until it was time to pounce. Reaching the conning tower, I gazed down through the open hatch. Surprisingly, there was little marine growth around the edges, and after clipping a guideline to the stubby radio mast, I went inside. My first impression was one of intense cold. I guessed that this might have been due to sunlight from above being unable to penetrate the wreck to warm the non-moving water within it. As I played my powerful torchlight over the interior, a mass of pipework and sheathed wiring, I could not help but feel a sense of great curiosity. There did not seem to be any apparent reason for the U-boat's sinking. Due to the confined space, moving around was difficult. I had opted for a small rebreather instead of traditional scuba to avoid the risk of my bubbles stirring up sediment, which could quickly reduce the visibility to zero. The rebreather also offered the considerable advantage of plenty of gas for a long dive and deco stops afterwards. Fine greenish sediment had settled on every surface, and even my gentle movement through the water dislodged fine rust, which rained down from above, reducing visibility to no more than a meter ahead. My torch, which is hugely powerful and one of the best on the market, seemed unable to penetrate the somber interior efficiently. It was as if the darkness had a substance of its own. It soaked up light like a sponge. Cautiously, I edged forward, going deeper into the aquatic mausoleum. The water around me felt somehow thicker, and I had the impression that I was swimming in treacle. The darkness increased. How could the inside of a submarine be so damned big? I had swum for what I considered a considerable distance, yet there seemed to be no end to the cavernous interior. After another 5 minutes of finning, I stopped. I figured that I must have swum a couple of 100 meters. There was no way that this type of sub could be so big inside. Hell, it wasn't anywhere near so long on the outside. It just did not make sense. The other and more worrying reason that I had stopped was fear. My light was almost useless. Examining it, I could see that it burned brightly enough, yet the darkness was somehow darker and hungrier. It was then that I noticed the smell. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that is the best way to describe it. It was as if I could smell something rancid, a rotting stench that I could taste through the rebreather's mouthpiece. I inched forward, my heart pounding in my chest and ears like thunder. The smell was almost overpowering. Suddenly, I came within inches of some kind of barrier, a wall of thick, undulating darkness. I sensed that the darkness was waiting. For what? I had no idea. But strangely, I felt sure it had been waiting for a long time. Don't ask me what made me do it. Curiosity, stupidity, who knows? Tentatively, I reached out. I watched as my hand disappeared, engulfed by the blackness. The pain was immediate and excruciating, a freezing coldness that penetrated the very bones of my finger and began to spread up my wrist and into my arm. I felt, touched pure evil. In horror, I screamed, snatched my hand back, and retreated as fast as I could towards the conning tower and its open hatchway. I did not bother to collect my guidelines. I fled for the surface in terror, up towards the light. I had no intention of ever going back after that first dreadful experience. For 2 days, I managed to pretend to myself that it had simply not happened. I began to wonder whether or not there might have been something wrong with my recollection of events. Perhaps I was the effects of nitrogen narcosis, though that is not something that has seriously affected me in over 30 years of diving. A distant family member is often described as not playing with a full deck. She spent some time in an asylum. I hope it is not hereditary. I had almost deliberately forgotten about the wreck until I mentioned it to Jürgen. Afterwards, I reasoned that telling Jürgen was an attempt to accept that I was not crazy and had indeed seen something. Of course, now I realize there might have been some other motive for telling him. From the moment I told him about the wreck, he was hooked. Where was it? How deep? Would it make a good dive for customers? It was the first time there had been any semblance of friendship between us for months. He insisted that we should explore it together. How could I refuse? As we descended towards the submarine, I watched Jürgen's face. When the ghostly shape of the wreck began to become visible, his eyes grew wide with excitement. He turned to me and grinned, then finned towards the conning tower. I followed. The wreck looked exactly the same as the last time I had seen it. A chill of memory shivered down my spine. Jürgen looked down into the wreck and then, seemingly on impulse, took hold of the guideline I had left last time and followed it headfirst down into the gloomy innards of the submarine. I did not want to go inside again, but felt grudgingly that I ought to stay with my partner. Inside, it seemed even colder than before. Jürgen was kneeling on the bottom, looking around with his torch, holding the guideline. He indicated that I should go first and that he would follow. I shook my head and signaled that he should lead. He shrugged and then set off, with me close behind. We swam for quite some time before Jürgen stopped and turned to me. He looked confused. We had been swimming for a ridiculously long time. Considering the size of the U-boat, he appeared worried. But I gave him the okay sign, which seemed to be all the reassurance he needed. He swam deeper into the darkness. Nervously, I followed him. Not long after, I began tasting that revolting smell I had previously experienced. The apparent thickness of the water seemed to slow our movements tenfold, and the light from our torches withered to pathetic conicals of light. We had reached oily blackness. I have no satisfactory explanation for what I did next. Perhaps it was because Jürgen had virtually stolen my dive school from me. It might even have been that I simply did not like him anymore. Whatever the reason, it is sufficient to say that I pushed him into the blackness. Jürgen fell forward and was immediately engulfed. For a brief moment, I felt relieved, glad to be rid of him. Then all hell broke loose. His panic-stricken face reappeared through the oily film. His mask and regulator were gone, and he was screaming in terror. I could actually hear his muffled cries as vast bubbles of air spewed from his mouth. The darkness began to retreat deeper into the wreck, and it seemed to be dragging Jurgen with it. His arms flailed wildly, his fingers desperately trying to grab onto something. I could hear and see his fingernails scraping and splintering against the cold metal floor. Then he was gone. I felt no guilt, only a weird kind of revulsion. It was the kind of excited disgust that I had when, as a kid, I had peered into the gutter at the mashed remains of some poor animal, a cat, I think, that had been hit by a car a few days before. How long would this thing, whatever it was, be satisfied with one person? I wondered. I turned and left. Ascending to the surface, I looked back down, half expecting the wreck to disappear. It hadn't. All this happened a matter of days ago, and since then, I have been haunted. I have been haunted by the ghosts of my life. People who have at some time caused problems for me, let me down and disappointed me. Since I have spent most of my life in the diving industry, it is not surprising that most of these people are also divers. It would not be hard to persuade them to explore a virgin wreck of a U-boat with me. It is a temptation that I must resist for the sake of all that is good. I am a good man. Last night, I started to draw up a list of potential diving partners' names. It is just a game. Really, I do not intend to do anything with this list. I am a good person. The list is a lot longer than I had expected. At first I thought it was fun. We lived in an RV. It was like an endless vacation. One week we were in LA, the next we were in Salt Lake City. We didn't know much about our lives before this. We knew we were born in Portland and that we could never stop moving. We always knew we were a special family. I just guess we didn't know how special we were. My parents tried so hard to have kids and almost lost hope. That's why my twin sister and I were so special to them. They're little miracles. It was annoying, but at least we knew we meant something to them. Amelia and I were fairly close. As far as siblings go, we were kind of each other's only friends. Since we were homeschooled, we felt pretty isolated. We never set up camp anywhere fun. No KOA campgrounds with ice cream shops and swimming pools. Always driving off-road and living deep in the woods. I guess it was peaceful, in a way, but anyone who grew up near the woods understands it's not something you mess with. The first time I really personally realized something was up was just before our 7th birthday, when we were staying in a place in BC called Kamloops. We weren't supposed to sneak out or leave Mom and Dad's sight, but at the time, we were mischievous 6-year-olds with a huge, unexplored forest in front of us. What do you expect? We waited until they fell asleep for the night and snuck out of the RV through the window, which was easy because the window was just a sheet of plastic held together by a zipper, and we set off with nothing but a shitty lantern to illuminate the path in front of us. It wasn't long before we saw something strange. A glow, not from our lantern. It was coming from in front of us. It didn't take long for us to see who, or what, was in front of us. It was a lady holding a small, homemade torch, but she didn't look much like a lady. Her hair was matted and fallen out in some places. Her skin was almost blue and looked rotted. Her teeth were yellow and a few were missing, and I thought you could even see part of her jaw. She was wearing a dirty hospital gown. I didn't know where the nearest hospital was, but it had to be pretty damn far, because the last time I remember driving anywhere with a paved road had to be 3 hours before we set up our camp here. Amelia and I were frozen in fear, and for the first time since we had mutually decided affection towards siblings was lame. I reached for her hand. That thing reached out its bony arm to us. It moaned something almost indecipherable, like mububu. That was enough to snap me out of it, and I sprinted away, dragging Amelia behind me. By some miracle, we had made it back to the RV, and, by some other miracle, got back in without waking our parents. We didn't get much sleep, and were far too shaken up to even say good morning to our parents, let alone tell them what happened. Would they have even believed us if we told them? Well, after what happened next, I guess they would have to. When we opened the door to the RV, we saw that the remains of what we had left out overnight, a campfire reduced to ashes, the sticks covered in charcoal Amelia and I had used to draw on the rocks, and a makeshift table with a few cans of beans had been utterly destroyed. It wasn't too out of the ordinary to have our camp ravished by animals. We lived in the woods after all, but this was something no animal could do. This looked set up, like whatever did it had a plan. What we saw written on the back of the RV confirmed this belief. In the charcoal sticks, someone had written, "You can't run forever on our trailer." Mom made us breakfast while Dad cleaned up the mess. We left shortly after that and drove for hours, not even stopping for quick washroom breaks. Mom and Dad spoke in hushed whispers as Dad drove. I wish I knew what they had been talking about. That night, I guess because Mom and Dad could see we were shaken up, they took us for a rare treat, a dinner at a real restaurant, a shitty diner, but a restaurant nonetheless. It was empty there, which was why my parents liked it, as they hated crowds. I was over the moon. A root beer float and a greasy cheeseburger was anything a 6-year-old boy could dream of, which was why I was so upset when Mom and Dad made us leave the second someone else came in. It was just an old trucker. I didn't get the big deal. While we were in the RV, Amelia asked why we had to leave while I sulked in my bunk, a glorified shelf. Mom sighed. "I suppose you two are almost 7. That's old enough to know." "Well, Zachary, Amelia, the reason we had to leave is because we're scared of losing you. Do you remember what happened when you were 4? I had no idea. My memory was never good, but Amelia claimed to remember. We were in Beaverton, not too far from Portland. She said that when we were 4, we were running around in a field when a big man in camouflage and bit boots came up to us and bent down to our level. "We're not supposed to talk to strangers," Amelia said. She was always a goody two-shoes. "I'm John. Now we're not strangers. What are your names?" "I'm Zach, and that's my sister Amelia. We're 4, and our birthday is July 26th, 2002, I'd apparently said, but I bet Amelia just said I said that to make me look worse. That's when he stopped smiling. He roughly took our hands and started to lead us away. "Let's go somewhere fun. Zach and Amelia, I need to take you someplace else." My mom got teary. "That's right. If your dad and I hadn't caught you just before you left, we probably would have never seen you again. I took you to someplace safe. And your dad, well, your dad, I shot that son of a bitch in the leg. Hope he had fun crawling back to his house," he said coldly. Amelia and I shot each other glances. "Okay, Daddy, I'm going to go to sleep now," she said, climbing over me to get to her bunk. That night we stopped somewhere for the night. I forgot where, probably near the interior of BC or maybe Alberta. I looked out the little plastic window and I saw her. I saw that fucking lady again. She was staring at me and Amelia in our bunk beds, reaching out for us with that same long, bony hand. I rolled over and tried to sleep, but couldn't, knowing she was there. Life continued on like that for a while. Anywhere we'd stop, she'd be there. Washington, there she was. Nevada, you bet your ass. Montana, better fucking believe it. Amelia and I didn't really explore much anymore, partially because we were getting older and gradually showing less interest in that sort of thing, but partially because that experience in Kamloops traumatized us both. That didn't stop the lady from trying to get us. Sometimes we'd catch a glimpse of her on the highway as we drove by. Sometimes she'd appear right where the fire of our campsite stopped illuminating, so we could barely see her. On the rare occasion we went into public to get supplies or food, I could have sworn I caught a glimpse of her in the crowd whenever she was around. I always heard that damn cry of hers. Moh, boh, boh. After a while, she stopped scaring me. Well, as much. Everything finally made sense. The day before Amelia and I turned 14, Mom and Dad had left the RV and gave us two a rare couple hours of freedom as they gathered things for our birthday. We weren't parked ridiculously far from civilization, but I'd say a good hour's worth of walking. We weren't that scared. We had lived in the woods long enough to know as long as you didn't bother the forest, it wouldn't bother you. And the lady in the hospital gown was honestly more of an annoyance than anything else. I'd even go so far to say we had almost forgotten about her. I was reading and Amelia was rummaging around the RV for food. I was getting immersed in my book when Amelia shouted out, "Zach, come check this out." I rolled my eyes. What could it be? We had lived in this tiny RV for almost 14 years. I knew it like the back of my hand. There was absolutely no nook or cranny I didn't know about. Oh, I guess I was wrong. There, under the driver's seat cushion Amelia had pulled out, for some reason, was a box. It was small and a bit squished from all the years of my dad's ass sitting on it, but we could still tell what it was. Amelia excitedly reached to open it. Inside were papers. "Forget about it, Amelia. It's probably just boring documents for work," I said, but the look of confusion to horror on my sister's face was enough to change my mind. They were documents, but not for work. Birth documents, for us. But the stated parents weren't ours. I was apparently Zachary Jr., but nobody in my family was named Zachary. I looked at the father's name, Zachary. The mother was someone named Emily. Maybe we were adopted, I suggested. Amelia reached in and pulled out another sheet of paper. She shook her head and held out the next one for me with a shaky hand. "Infants missing from Portland Hospital, July 27th. 2002, twins, Zachary Christopher Clark Jeter and Amelia Emily Clark. Ongoing search. Anyone with information is to report it to the police immediately." Clark, Christopher, those weren't our names. Our last name was Brown, and our parents certainly weren't Zachary and Emily. They were Jenny and Kevin. I had a feeling things were going to get worse. I was right, as Amelia pulled out the third and second to last paper. Portland mother of two murdered in hospital. Emily Clark, 27, had recently given birth to twins, now missing, when she was smothered to death in her own hospital bed. Police drawing of suspects. We looked at the police drawing. It was obviously not a complete match, but they were basically the only other two faces we had seen our entire lives, Mom and Dad. CCTV footage shows the two suspects leaving the hospital through a back door with the two infants. Search is ongoing. If spotted, do not approach these individuals. Alert the authorities immediately. We were silent as Amelia shakily grabbed the last piece of paper. This was from 2006. We were 4. After an Oregon man allegedly spotted the missing kids and Washington S. attacked by the perpetrators. A glimpse of hope is seen in this 4-year-long LD case. Father and husband of the victims, Zachary Clark, shares this message to my babies. "I have no idea where you two are, but I will never let go of hope that one day I will see your beautiful faces again. You may not even know who I am, but that doesn't change anything. Until we meet again, Daddy loves you." We couldn't even say anything. What do you even say to that? We just stood in silence for a while. Then, we heard a banging on the RV. We jumped and looked outside. It was the lady in the hospital gown, closer than ever. We could see her bluish grey skin. We could see her hazel eyes. They kind of looked like Amelia's. "Move, boo, boo!" she moaned, reaching out for us again. I looked down to the newspaper clipping. It had a picture of the victim on it. I held it up to the window, where she was staring at us. "Moo, boo, boo," she said again. "Moo, boo, boo." My baby. All this time, she had just wanted her babies. Amelia stepped out of the RV. I was scared at first, but this day couldn't get any crazier, so I followed. Mama?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "Boo, boo," she said, reaching her bony hand out once again. But she didn't run. She let her touch her face, as she gently rubbed her hand across her cheek. She did the same to me, but then pointed in the direction of the nearest town. "Go!" "Go," she said. "Go? Why?" Amelia asked. "Dada," our mother croaked. Dad, Zachary Sr., was he still alive? After all this time? "We have 2 hours until Mom and Dad." Amelia cut herself off. "They get back. Let's go. Quick!" Although we really didn't have any idea how to get to the town, we somehow knew, like someone was guiding us. We busted into the sheriff's office, probably looking awful. First came the questioning, then the DNA testing. Then they looked for our parents. Then they arrested my parents. Then the news stories and the interviews. Then we were flown out in a plane, my first plane ever, to Portland to meet our dad. We were quite the story. They called my parents the wretches of the woods. They thought of them as evil witches who stole us and hid us deep in the woods. I guess they were right, in a way. It was weird seeing them behind bars, serving life sentences, because after all, they raised us for nearly 14 years. But that's where they'll stay. No running, no hiding. There's nowhere to hide in a cell. He burst into tears when he saw us. We didn't. It was weird. He was my dad. And all, but was he? I mean, I guess I met him when I was like a few hours old, but I just couldn't connect to him. It took a while, but we slowly got used to our new lives. In a house, with a bed and our own rooms, not running from everything, or living in the woods. It was peaceful. Although most of the time I ended up sneaking into Amelia's room, because after all this time I still couldn't be alone. One time, I got a knock on our window. We both woke up and saw the lady in the hospital gown outside, but she looked happier, less rotten, like she was complete again. "Mama," I asked, could she stay, and I could live with the family I craved, like she read my mind. She shook her head. "I have to go. My babies," she said, reaching her hand out to us through the window as she slowly disappeared into the night. We never saw her again after that, but we always knew she was watching us. But this time, we wouldn't run. I work for a non-profit in a fairly large city in the New England area. Think bigger than most Midwestern cities, but nowhere near as big as NYC. I'm trying to keep this as vague as possible without leaving out important details, as I do love my job and I would hate for this to impact it somehow. That being said, very recent events have made it difficult to stay silent, and I desperately need some advice on what to do next. So anyways, the non-profit I work for specifically serves homeless and underprivileged boys and young men in our city. We offer food, shelter, showers, you name it. Anything to keep them off the streets, is what our founder has always said. He's been running things since the late 70s and simply refuses to retire. He spent most of his childhood homeless, so I guess he made it his personal mission to help as many youths as he could. I work on the admin side, so I don't actually see the ones we help out as much, but it's still very fulfilling work. Recently, my main focus has been on house hunting of all things. We've long since outgrown our current facilities in the city. With some creative thinking, we've been able to make it work longer than it probably should have. But now we're at the point where we've been forced to turn some kids away. We all hate it, most of all the owner. So we decided to find some room in the budget and put it towards finding a second location. My budget was pretty restrictive, especially considering how much space we needed. For this and a few other reasons, we decided to look in more of the rural areas outside of town. It takes a couple hours to get out of the urban sprawl, but after that it pretty abruptly falls off into forests and farmland. Growing up in the city myself, it honestly feels like driving on an alien planet, but I can't deny how peaceful it is. After a few months with absolutely zero listings in our price range, I finally found one that we could afford, and that wasn't too far away. It was a big ranch-style home on a few acres all to itself. It even had a barn that we could probably repurpose into additional lodging at some point. The price seemed almost too good to be true, but the house did need some serious work just looking at the pictures, and I was sure even more would be found during an inspection. Me and a few other members of the admin team drove out that same day to take a look. The realtor selling the place was your textbook small-town celebrity. As we met with him, he greeted every other person by name as they passed by on the street, and when we asked about the work needing to be done on the house, he rattled off a list of a dozen contractors in the area that he knew personally. He had a big smile and a way of talking that made me feel like we had already bought the place. The realtor told us the history of the lot, how it had been owned by a prominent local family for generations. Multiple members of the family had served as mayors or judges in town, going back over 200 years. The family even had a small church built on the property back in the early 1800s. the only church in town for quite a while. Unfortunately, it had been demolished back in the 1930s. He said the foundation is still out in the wooded area of the lot somewhere, though it's pretty much entirely grown over with grass and other foliage now. I asked why the family had decided to sell the place after so long, and he told us how the only remaining descendants had passed away recently with no apparent heirs, and they willed it and everything else they had to the town. There was some push from the locals to turn it into a museum, but the city council didn't figure they really had the tourism draw to keep such a thing going. The realtor said he was surprised to hear back on the listing so quickly, since everyone seems to be moving to the city, not so much the other way round. We asked a few more questions and pretended to take the night to mull it over, but we were already sold. Even after the inspections and all the estimates, it still came in just under budget. It needed a lot of work for sure, but it had that rustic charm. Or maybe the realtor was just really good at selling things. The other admins were already drawing up plans of how everything would be situated and the best ways to utilize the space. We called him back first thing in the morning. We closed on it just over a month ago. Since then, I've mainly been in charge of going out there and meeting with and checking on contractors as we get the place fixed up. The goal is to have it ready before the holiday season, as that always tends to be a busy time of year for us. Things have been progressing smoothly aside from a few hiccups here or there. I normally go up every few days for an hour or two. Last weekend I drove up as usual on Friday to take a look. We have electrical and plumbing fully finished now, and after some work on the north-facing wall that was just completed, it was mostly rotted out. The home is now officially inhabitable. It still needs new flooring in most of the house, a newer divided by sea and furnace, new hot water heater, new light fixtures, and so on. But just being able to live in it felt like a pretty significant milestone. I had a busy morning, so I got there a little later than usual this time, and within the hour, the workers had packed up and left for the day. I knew if I left, then I would just be sitting in rush hour traffic for hours, so I figured this would be the perfect time to get some updated pictures to send the rest of the team. So I spent the next hour or so walking around and snapping pics of the progress. After I finished up, the sun had started to set, so I decided to head out. That is until I realized that I must have driven over a rogue nail on my way into the driveway. My front left tire was completely flat. Lovely. And of course that tire was already the spare. That's on me, I guess. But I will say that the work I do doesn't exactly afford me a ton of extra cash each month. For this same reason, I was also hesitant to call somebody out to tow me who knows how far to the nearest tire shop that was still open. And so I made the decision to test out just how inhabitable the place really was. I had some old blankets in the trunk and an extra phone charger. It would be kinda like camping, I thought, or at least as close as a city boy like me had ever experienced. I called the others at work and let them know, half hoping one of them would offer to drive out and pick me up. No luck. While I still had some light, I walked back down the winding driveway to close the main gate by the road. Then I brought the blankets in from the car and set up a small sleeping area in the living room. All in all, it was comfortable enough. It was a bit drafty, and the place creaked and moaned like any old house. I also found the moonlight peeking through the thick forests a little unsettling. The way the trees moved in the wind made my mind play tricks on itself. Seeing figures in the tree trunks and movement in the branches, I wished we had curtains I could pull shut to stop the shadows from dancing across the floor all around me. I walked around the house to make sure everything was shut up and locked before I crawled into my homemade floor mattress and tried to go to sleep. A few hours later, I woke up abruptly. It felt like that telltale sensation of falling that jolts you from a dream, though I didn't remember dreaming anything just prior. It took a minute for me to calm myself back down, and I decided I might as well get some water before I went back to sleep. As I stood up, I glanced out the window and went still. There was light coming out from the woods. Not moonlight, warm yellow light, flickering through the thick bramble of trees. My first thought was some sort of forest fire. My heart dropped as my mind went to the worst-case scenario. I pictured the place going up in smoke so close to it being finished. We'd be back to square one. I pulled my shoes on quickly and grabbed my phone as I headed out the back door. I wasn't excited about trudging through the woods in the middle of the night. but I needed to confirm if there was a fire so I could call someone as soon as possible. Trudging was definitely the right word. I had to lift my knees high to step through the thick underbrush as small branches smacked me in the face and cut into my arms. I had my phone flashlight on, but it didn't help much with the leaves being as thick as they were. After a few minutes, I had almost decided to head back and just call the fire department to be safe, but just then, I saw what looked like the edge of a clearing, where the yellow flickering light was much brighter. I pushed forward a little more and broke through the tree line. What I saw confused me more than anything. No forest fire. Lanterns. Small, handheld oil lanterns, and they were being carried by a line of people walking calmly down a worn dirt path through the woods. They were only maybe 20 feet away, at least 50 of them. There were men, women, and children, and they all wore simple black and white clothes that looked like something out of the Crucible. I stood dumbfounded and realized that I must still be asleep. But I couldn't wake up. I bit my lip and closed my eyes, but the procession remained when I opened them. The end of the line was just about to pass me. I yelled at them. I don't remember what I said. Not that it mattered much, because they didn't react at all. They just kept walking, so I followed them. What else was I supposed to do? As I fell in behind the last of them, I realized it was what seemed to be a small family. A young man and woman with a small boy in tow. The woman was crying. I tried to reach out to one of them, but my hand always seemed just too far away, like some sort of optical illusion. I shouted again, and again got no feedback whatsoever. As I continued following them, I saw some sort of structure at the end of the path. It was simply built and painted white. The roof rose up sharply on both sides to a steep point at the top. There were a set of double doors opening right onto the path, with a half-circle window sitting atop them. It looked like a church. I kept telling myself I should just run back to the house and pull the covers over my head, but I followed anyway. The people filed neatly into the church, which seemed to be lit with bright oil lanterns along the walls inside and flanking the door on the outside. As the congregation entered, they snuffed out their handheld lanterns and bowed to a man at the door. It took a few minutes to get to the front of the line, and the family in front of me also bowed. As they did, the man at the door, who until this point had remained statuesque, reached forward and placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. He leaned close and said something to her. She nodded back, but didn't stop crying. I slipped inside behind them, and I felt a cool gust at my back as the doors closed. The family Saturday down in one of the pews which lined the main aisle. At the end of the aisle was a simple wooden podium standing on a raised platform. Beyond it was a small opening to another room or hallway. The man at the door walked past me down the aisle. The room was completely silent as all of the congregation sat with their heads bowed. As the man took his place behind the podium, he called out in a language I didn't understand. It sounded kind of like Latin. He spoke for a few moments, and then was met with a response from the group in unison. This went back and forth for a few minutes. Occasionally, a man who sat nearest the podium would ring a bell, and the people would all look upward for a few seconds before returning their gaze to the ground. The man stepped out from behind the podium and held out his hands as he spoke once more. This time it sounded like a question, after a silence that seemed just a bit too long. A weak, faltering voice answered from the rear of the room. The mother stood up with her son and stepped into the aisle. As they did, the father took the son's hand and said something to him before reluctantly letting go. The mother kneeled down and embraced the young boy. She cried openly, but no one else moved or reacted at all. The boy himself looked unfazed. He wrenched himself from her grasp and started walking down the aisle. The woman collapsed on the floor, and only then did her husband move to help her back into the pew. The man at the podium smiled as the boy approached him, and all of the people in the church bowed and repeated something under their breath as he walked past their row. The man at the podium took the boy's hand and led him through the opening at the back. For a few minutes, no one moved or spoke. It felt like an eternity, finally broken only by the ringing of the bell once more, though this time it echoed from far away. In unison, everyone in the church stood again and began filing into the same opening. The tension wrapped tightly around my chest. I began running through the crowd towards the back of the church. As I passed by people, It seemed as though I partially moved through them somehow, and my whole body shivered. I reached the open doorway and found only a small room, not much bigger than a closet. But set into the ground was a large wooden hatch held open with a metal hook on the wall. Carved stone steps led down into an inky abyss. I remember thinking in that moment, if I go down there, I may never be the same. But I went down anyway, like a moth to a campfire. The steps led down deeper than I thought, and they ended in a large stone room. Some of the congregation was already here. They knelt on the cold, hard floor with their hands flat on the ground in front of them. As more entered, they assumed the same position. Beyond them, the only light in the room came from a small candelabra. It Saturday on a wide stone altar. The boy lay on the altar with his eyes closed and his arms crossed over his chest. The man from the podium stood behind him and chanted something as he held a small metal pitcher above his head. On the wall behind them was a taxidermied bull head with great big horns. Only the bottom of it was lit by the candles, and even glancing at it made me feel an overwhelming sense of dread. I looked away just in time to see the last of the group entering and kneeling down. It was the mother and father. They both moved as if partially comatose, almost trance-like. The man at the altar spoke once more. This time there were no responses from the group. Every few sentences, he would stop and pour something from the pitcher onto the child in front of him. It looked clear, but it was thicker than water. The boy didn't react, even as the man poured the liquid over his face. After this repeated a handful of times, he upended the pitcher entirely and emptied it. He then turned from the boy and faced the bull head mounted on the wall. He spoke once more, again sounding like a question, before he joined everyone else in kneeling on the ground with his hands forward. In a moment, all the air in the room seemed to evaporate. I couldn't breathe, and it sounded as if I was in a vacuum. My heart seemed to beat irregularly, and I nearly fell to the ground. And then I heard it, or I felt it, or I sensed it. I don't know. Something in the silence, a more intense pressure, like something pushing on my eardrums and my eyes at the same time. I tried to gasp as I felt my lungs flatten in my chest. I saw some of the people on the floor start to react similarly, and at the height of everything, I saw the candelabra tip over on its own and fall onto the altar. All at once, a cacophony of sight and sound erupted in the small room. The boy's body erupted in flames. People screamed, some in terror, though most in some sick sense of euphoria. The flames licked up onto the ceiling and spread along it, bathing the whole room in radiant heat. The boy's body convulsed and flailed. The man at the altar laughed as he danced around with glee, and the flames parted just enough to see the bull's head on the wall, fully illuminated in a dark red hue. For a split second, I swear I saw it move. My senses caught up to me, and I ran from the room faster than I've ever moved before. I flew up the stairs, taking 2 or 3 with each stride. The screaming and laughing did not die down behind me. As I reached the top of the steps, I was relieved to find the hatch still open, and even more relieved to see the front door to the church once again open at the far end of the aisle. I continued running, nearly tripping and falling around the podium in my mad scramble. I never looked back, even as I found myself once again on the dirt pathway. I just kept running, even when I no longer knew where I was or where I was going. The path eventually ended, and I found myself back in the thick mess of trees. They cut into me even sharper than before as I pushed through frantically. By some miracle, I happened to spy the house again through the leaves. I ran inside and locked the door. I crawled into my blankets and stayed there unmoving for some length of time. After a while, I worked up the courage to glance out the window again for just a second. No light in the woods, nothing to see. I retreated to my safe space again. I didn't move until I saw sunlight through the threads of the sheets. That's where I am now, sitting on the floor in this empty house, wrapped in tattered old blankets. If I had fallen back asleep afterwards, I would have written it off as a nightmare, but I have the fresh cuts on my arms and legs, and still wet mud on my shoes to prove otherwise. I don't know how, but it was all real, more real than anything I've ever experienced. I don't know what to do. Should I call the police? I want to tell the others at work, but I know they'll just think I've lost it. Part of me thinks I should go back out and see if anything is still there. get some pictures or something. But the thought of going back there makes me sick. There's something in the woods, and I think it's been there a long time. I know it sounds ridiculous. The danger exists all around us, and once you recognize it, it's hard not to understand. I cannot be the only one who's experienced this. I'm in my 4th year of college at a state university, and I'm still living in the dorms. My roommate was an influencer. She has a lot of followers on all of the major sites, and I don't want to expose her here, so let's call her Roomie. Her brand is her lifestyle stuff in conjunction with being a student, or get ready with me kind of stuff. When I first moved in at the beginning of the fall semester, what annoyed me the most was the amount of crap she had. The room barely had enough space for 2 beds, a desk, and communal space in the middle. When I came in with a couple of suitcases, her side of the room was already full of stuff, all boxes. Beneath the bed, on top of the desk and under it, stacked up against the wall, and up to the middle point of the room, on which the other side was my half. It was like an episode of Hoarders of something. Some of the boxes were open, and they were all full of clothes and makeup and hair stuff. Roomie arrived a couple hours after I'd checked into the dorm and had been unpacking. She was pretty and about medium in size, and her outfit matched her shoes and accessories. Our first conversation went exactly like this. "Hi, it's nice to meet you. I'm Nicole. I just checked in and I'm going to be your roommate for this semester. Sorry that my suitcases are sticking out into the middle. I'll pick them up soon." "Nicole, I'm Roomie. It's so nice to meet you. Girl, let's get dinner. I have a sponsorship at the place downtown, so the meal will be comped. Are you okay if I post a meeting the roommate selfie?" "Oh, yeah, that sounds, okay with me. Let's go eat. Then, are you on Instagram or something? I'll add you." "Yeah, I'm everywhere. Hang on, let me change my headband. I already posted myself wearing it today. I need something kind of nostalgia-y, like blueberry mocha combined with Y2K kind of couture. Hang on, do you mind putting your hair up? I'll get more engagement that way. And let's go to the bathroom mirror to make it look more casual and spontaneous." I knew she was kind of weird from the start. Not like creepy or mean weird, but just weird with how she did things. So for the most part, I tried to stay out of Roomie's way. I was taking 18 credit hours, so it wasn't hard to do. But things got difficult after a little while. Her ringer was always on, always, and her phone wouldn't ever go more than half an hour without a loud ding. After 2 near sleepless nights, I decided to confront her when I woke up for the 5th time at 2 o'clock in the morning. "Hey Roomie, are you okay with turning down the volume on your phone? It's a little bit loud," I explained in the dark room. "Sorry, Nicole, but I have to be ready to engage at all times." I bought earplugs the next day, and that fixed it. But I noticed that she never really slept for more than a half hour at a time, since I tended to stay up later to study during the week. I noticed that she would stay on her phone for a few minutes or step outside to make a call. I don't know how she did it, and a couple of weeks into the year I tried tactfully asking her one evening, Today was so long, I don't know why I stacked 4 two-hour classes for Fridays. Since you're always getting woken up at night, how do you do it? It's not hard. It's just part of my life. Do you want this skirt? I did a go to class with me shoot this morning and I'm done with it. That's how most of our conversations went. I'm a pretty easygoing person, and the earplugs made it easy to deal with. But it started getting way harder to bear when the stuff started piling up. Literal stuff. The boxes of crap that lined the walls and the living space started to move toward the center communal area in the room. They were all filled with plastic junk. Come study with me. I got this pencil eraser holder and it is so cute. You guys, you need it. Look, it's metal. It has these little plates to hold those pencil topper erasers and those bigger pink ones. And I got mine in ivory to match the calming environment of my desk to go for the serious studying aesthetic. I just love it. If you're interested, the link to purchase them is down in the description. Love you guys. That crap would go back to the box on the same day. I ended up speaking to our floor's RA about it, and he scheduled a conflict resolution discussion for the three of us. We sat in the shared office, and I was over being polite by that point. The stuff is getting really out of hand. The boxes almost block the ceiling lights, and her phone rings all the time throughout the night. It doesn't encroach on her space. I'm a content creator, and half the room is my space. I need my stuff to make content. Well, the contract states that you guys' space is divided down the middle. Let's go look and see if your room violates that. No, it wasn't. One half of the room was just turning into a void of crap. Since she wasn't breaking the contract rules, it was declared fine. I wanted to rip my hair out. Rumi gave me kind of a sad look, and after that, it started getting worse. She stopped going to class. On the days of the week when I left before the sun came up, she'd be sitting at her desk chair on her side of the room, filming herself opening a box, and when I came back in the afternoon, she'd still be there, opening a different box. The ring light around the phone would illuminate her face in the dark room, eyes boring into it as she spoke. Oh my God, guys, look at this gorgeous pendant. The gold plating just screams hot girl autumn. It's a must-have for anybody. As a college student, I feel like it just ties all my outfits together, whether I'm going out with roommates for the evening or just going to class on a low-effort vibes kind of day. The circular shape and floral embellishment ties it together into a really defined kind of thing, and the simplicity of it matches your style, whether you're into like alt girl vibes or Y2K girly vibes or clean girl aesthetic. Then I'd hear the rip of packing tape, a breath, and the same words. Again. Oh my God, guys, look at this off-white pencil holder. Oh my God, guys, look at this sunset orange organic nail polish. Oh my God, guys, look at this wood-carved earring set I got from this online boutique. The words came out of her mouth smoothly and robotically, her voice high-pitched and monotone. My stomach churned every time I walked into the dorm. She needed some sort of help. I got into the habit of asking her if she wanted to go out or needed help with any homework or anything, and she'd turn in the chair and just look at me, eyes unfocused. I ended up contacting the RA again, and we met in the dorm. When he'd walk in, she'd pause her filming, and when he asked if she was all right, she'd nod and say yes, still in that high-pitched monotone, like she was recording a meet with my RA with me. She gave bland, sensible answers to a few questions, and he shrugged at me and left. There wasn't much left to do. I started throwing away stuff, the boxes that had already been opened, with the crap neatly put back inside. She never seemed to mind. It was like bailing water from a flooding room. Even after making several trips to the trash chute a day, it didn't seem to make any difference. One of the worst parts was how they clogged the doorway. The packages always arrived right at the door, instead of going to the mailroom. I always seemed to miss the deliveries. Only once, a few weeks ago, I saw the back of a man dressed in grey dropping off a box without a label. I tried waving him down to talk to him and figure out how on earth she was getting multiple deliveries straight to the room a day. But his worker's boots rounded the corner before I could. Rumi filmed through the night. I had to shove my earplugs in as far as I could, and she didn't stop. Her eyes bored into the light, and her lips moved to smile and speak, but she barely blinked and never broke eye contact with the camera. I had to pull my blanket over my eyes to block out the outline of her lit-up, smiling face from behind my eyelids. About a week later, when I woke up, got ready for class and opened the door, it was completely blocked by cardboard boxes. That's when I fucking lost it. I almost broke a tendon when I threw my head back and groaned in pure frustration. I threw the stupid boxes off the railing. I kicked them till my toes were bruised. My weird, dumb roommate filming non-stop and not letting me sleep or have friends over or even leave. The fucking dorm without her packages filled with plastic shit that nobody needs getting in the way. I hated her. Once a couple of my neighbors had seen me lose my shit. I stormed back inside, blood boiling. The room seemed smaller than ever. $5,000 a semester for a tiny room with a crazy roommate. Nice. Rumi, my voice was too loud for the room. I didn't care who else heard. I can barely get out of the damn room. Get this shit out of here. Nothing. She just kept talking into the light. She had stopped blinking. I walked up behind her and shoved the chair forward. The legs wobbled, but she didn't move. She still didn't give a shit that she was the biggest pain in the ass I'd ever had. Her head stayed rigid, never moving an inch. What the hell? The blood pumping through my veins slowed. She would not move. Rumi, this is weird. Get the hell up off that chair and move your shit. You've been recording yourself for days. I don't know where this stuff is coming from. Come on, please get up. Oh my God, guys, look at this name-embossed luggage tag, made up of durable soft pleather. It can hold its shape while serving as a zip tie. I tapped her shoulder. Stiff, not soft. Grabbed it and shook it. She just kept talking. Her body was rigid. I've only touched one dead person before. At my great-uncle's funeral, when I was a kid. We went to the wake and my mom told me to pick up his hand at the open casket. It was hard and stiff, like a doll's. Rumi had a dead body. My stomach dropped. I reached for her hands to drag her as she presented the luggage tag to the camera, still warm. The moment I took them in mine, they froze in mid-air, elbows bolted to the desk, and her fingers clenched tight around the tag. Bending down a little, I was scared to get too close. I scrambled for her phone and hit the side button, turning it off. The ring light it stood on fell, the battery popping out as the bright circular beam reeled up to the ceiling, flickered, and died. Only some dim overhead lights illuminated the room, half concealed by the piles of boxes. Rumi still didn't blink. She still faced precisely forward, back bent, neck sunken in like a recoiled animal. She turned her head toward me. Her neck crackled. I took a step back and I yanked my hands away just as she clutched them tight in mine. Pop, pop, pop. 9 of my fingers dangled loose in her grasp, flopping like puppets from my knuckles. It took a second for the scorching pain to register. Fuck. What the fuck? Help! Somebody help. Oh, my God. Guys, look at these fingers. They're limp and soft. Only her lips moved. Her eyes were still watery and unblinking. Blind. She was blind. I pushed myself forward and whacked my head against hers and kicked the chair back and felt the most pain I'd ever felt in my life. I don't remember screaming, but I probably did. Rumi's feet dragged, and she fell off and onto the ground as the spinning wheels wobbled. She turned her dead-eyed head toward me, and I ran to the door as fast as I could. The handle. I couldn't look down at my hands now. I crooked it with my elbow. A pile of boxes covered the doorstep, standing up high over my head. The footsteps started behind me. I knocked them over as fast as I could, catching glimpses of my fingers dangling down to my palm as I kicked and thrashed my arms in every direction, wailing like an animal as my hands connected with the heavy boxes and fresh agony blazed through them. Slivers of sunlight peeked in and widened until I could break through. The steps reached close, and I could feel her fingers grazing the skin on my neck just as my feet hit the cement floor. I booked it down the hall and didn't look back. My breaths came ragged and fast, and the path in front of me came in a blur, and as I careened around the corner to the stairwell, I reflexively reached for the handrail and heard myself cry out before I felt the searing scrape on my swollen, dislocated joints. My knees turned to jelly, but my legs kept going, unable to stop, and I tripped on the last 2 steps. I couldn't hold my arms out. The air came in rusting sputters as my chest hit the ground and felt a tremor run through my jaw. A sharp pain dug into my ankle. I tested my arms and pushed my elbows against the ground. My fingers dangled helplessly. I couldn't put weight on my hands and get up. I took a deep breath. Help! Help! The first floor of the biggest dorm on campus is usually busy, and always has at least 1 or 2 people standing around. It didn't cross my mind why I didn't see anyone on my floor or the first that day. I was head down, and my left foot hurt almost as much as my hands. A pair of grey work boots crunched into the periphery in front of me. I looked down first. There was blood on the floor and my face felt wet. My neck hurt too much to look up, so I never saw his face. He helped me stand, and we ended up in a delivery truck filled with cardboard boxes. I don't remember much after that. I think I passed out when I sat still and got a good look at my fingers swinging loose. All I can think of is the workman in all grey, asking why there were so many boxes, and saying how my roommate wanted to kill me. All he said was, "She's a hard worker, running her personal brand. Content creation requires a lot of dedication and following the algorithm. Don't give her a hard time again, or you'll learn more than you want to know about the business." I didn't press charges. I came out of the hospital a couple days later with bandaged hands and a swollen ankle. It took me weeks to go back to school, and I never went back to the dorms. My RA and parents took my stuff for me. There was only one box in the whole room when the inspection was conducted, and Rumi was recording a video on multi-purpose branded bandages with it. Nothing wrong had happened besides me being clumsy. Sometimes when I close my eyes, all I see is Rumi's watery gaze. I don't go out much now. When I go to the gym and see a guy videoing his routine, or go out to eat and see a lady filming herself eating the food, I feel my stomach churn. Sometimes their backs are already bent, or their eyes don't blink. Please, don't become an influencer or a content creator. You'll be dead, and you won't even care. Over the course of my career, I have taught at 3 different schools, one as a student teacher, one teaching 6th grade, and now 2nd grade at what I'll generously call the neediest school in town. Most of my current students, and my students for the last 4 years I've worked here, come from homes with struggling parents. Usually, both parents, that is, if they're lucky enough to have 2, work 1 or more low-paying jobs, struggling to put food on their tables and send their kids to school with supplies. I'm no stranger to buying markers to hand out, keeping extra lunches in my desk, and, on more than one occasion, bringing clothes to school from the thrift store to keep my kids warm in the winter. I've found, over the years, that it's best to handle things on a personal level rather than getting government services involved. In the early days of my work, I found that CPS intervention can frequently do more harm than good, and even parents who fail their kids are usually trying their hardest. I hate to see families torn apart, and I know that the foster system is a rough place to live. More than a few of my students have been foster kids, and I wouldn't wish that kind of turmoil on any 7-year-old. Even if the home situation is rough, most parents love their kids. I suppose that's why I took so long to meddle in Charlie's situation. Charlie was a generally well-behaved kid. Even though I knew his family was struggling, I got the gist from the parent-teacher conference that only his mother attended, that his mom was a kind lady, a little too young to have a 7-year-old, who worked hard cleaning houses to give her son a good start in life. His father, from what I surmised, was present in body only. Charlie came to school every day scrubbed clean, with hair combed, and his worn-out clothes mended meticulously, despite the fact that he smelled strongly of his father's tobacco. I doubted that his nervous mother, with her neatly braided hair and pressed housekeeper's uniform, was the one smoking enough packs a day to make that skinny boy reek like a line cook. The only time I had to call Charlie's parents, when he missed the bus home one day, the man who answered my call merely barked at me to make him deal with his mistakes, and slammed the line down hard enough to rattle my skull. I ended up walking the boy home that day, and met his mother in the driveway coming home from work. She was grateful I had seen him home safely, and quickly ushered him inside. I thought I saw the ghost of a bruise on her cheek, but I couldn't be sure. Either way, I watched Charlie like a hawk since that day, and never saw any marks on his little pale face. Isn't that how it often happens? That the mother takes the blows for her child? I never had any other reason to doubt that Charlie's mother was caring for him well, until he arrived late for the first time, on a Monday in February. He looked disheveled in a way I was used to from some of my other kids, but not from him in particular. I approached him at the beginning of first recess to ask him if everything was all right. "Sorry, Miss B. I had to walk to school this morning. My mom forgot to wake me up and I missed the bus. I'll be on time tomorrow." His little face looked tired, with faint purple circles under his eyes. I assured him that it was all right. I just wanted to check and make sure he was doing okay. He nodded quickly and ran off to join the other kids on the wood chip playground. As he had promised, he was on time to school the rest of the week. Nothing strange occurred until Thursday, when he shyly approached me at the beginning of lunch period. My mom told me I could ask you if you had any snacks. There isn't any food in my house right now. Of course, you can always come to me if you're hungry, I replied, making a conscious effort to keep my voice free from pity. Is everything okay with you and your mom? Yeah, we're okay, I think, he answered quietly, focusing on his shoes. He paused a moment before adding, my dad left last weekend. I don't think he's going to come back this time. I'm very sorry to hear that, Charlie. I put what I hoped was a comforting hand on his shoulder. I'm always here to help you if you need a snack, or just somebody to talk to. He nodded solemnly. Thanks, Miss B. It's okay. My mom just hasn't been able to go to the store this week. He accepted the PB&J I offered and ate with the other kids. I decided I should call home and see if I could offer his mother any help. Hopefully, with her hot-tempered husband out of the picture, she could get back on her feet quickly. I would try to offer all the support I could. My call went to voicemail. Hi, Mrs. Collins. This is Miss Bell. I spoke to Charlie today, and I got the idea that there might be some changes happening for him at home right now. I just want you to know that I'll be bringing lunch to school for him tomorrow and Monday, and you just let me know if there's anything else I can do to help. Feel free to give me a call back, or send a note with Charlie if you'd like. I hope you two are doing well. On Friday at lunch, I gave Charlie a ham sandwich and asked him how his mom was doing. I find that with little boys especially, they're more willing to talk about their troubles if you ask indirectly. She's all right. I think I played your voicemail for her, and she said it was very nice of you to call home, but she has things under control. I was confused. You played my voicemail for your mom? I asked, keeping my voice light-hearted. It's pretty cool that she lets you be in charge of the phone. Yeah, she taught me to use the phone and my own alarm clock. He shrugged. She said she heard the phone ringing, but she couldn't get to it to call you back. He paused for a moment, thinking about what he wanted to say next. She's been shut in her room since Dad left. His words made me concerned, but I held my tongue. I've never had a husband leave me, even a deadbeat one, and the kids still looked healthy, even if a bit dirtier and more tired than usual. Besides, he was starting to smell less and less like cigarettes. All right, I said, leaning back in my desk chair. Well, your mom knows that if she needs anything, she can let me know. Charlie's words left a pit in my stomach all weekend. I even drove past his house on Saturday, against my better judgment, hoping to see signs that all was well. The lights were on, but I didn't see any sign of the boy or his mother. The only difference from the day I walked him home in November was the lack of beat-up green sedan in the driveway. Whether his mom was working on a Saturday or his piece of shit father took the car was anybody's guess. On Monday morning, Charlie arrived on time, wearing the same clothes as Friday, clearly unwashed. My stomach dropped when I saw him. As poor as she was, I knew his mom to be a pristine type of woman who kept her child well groomed, if threadbare. When I approached Charlie to give him his lunch, I caught a hint of an odd smell, one I didn't recognize. Fading cigarettes, unwashed clothes. I wasn't sure. Charlie, your mom never lets you come to school without your hair combed. I prodded gently. She hasn't been checking, so I figured I didn't have to, he said sheepishly. She told me to, but she didn't come out to look. Well, you should still make sure you do as your mom says, I replied. I honestly wasn't sure what else to say. I dealt with parents who drank too much, parents who couldn't afford to keep the lights on, and parents who vanished into thin air. But I wasn't sure what exactly to do about a mother who clearly cared, but had retreated into some kind of deep depression. My heart ached for the woman, and I wanted badly to speak to her directly. I couldn't keep playing telephone through this innocent boy, who knew exactly how much he understood of the situation anyway. I decided to send a letter home with him that afternoon. I reiterated almost exactly what I said in my initial call home, but added for good measure that I could arrange for Charlie to stay with a friend for a day or two if she needed time to herself, just to get composed. Charlie came in Tuesday morning with his hair combed and his clothes clean, but mismatched. He proudly showed me his 2 different socks. "My mom taught me how to do my own laundry last night," he announced to me proudly. "That's great," I exclaimed, offering a high five. "Did you give your mom the note I sent home?" "I did. I put it under her door like you told me to." He beamed. So, she was still hiding away. I worried silently that she might not be going to work either, if she wasn't coming out to send her son off to school. "Great job, buddy." I offered another high five. Charlie opted for a hug instead, wrapping his little arms around my neck. I couldn't help but notice, under the scent of detergent, the same smell as yesterday. I prayed that his mom wasn't slipping into a hoarder situation. I'd dealt with that before, and I didn't look forward to doing it again. Wednesday morning. Charlie looked like he hadn't slept at all. He'd been looking drained all week, but the dark circles on his round face kept compounding, until that morning when he looked positively exhausted. I asked him if he'd been sleeping well when I gave him his sandwich. Since I hadn't heard from Mrs. Collins, I kept bringing him lunch every day just in case. "Not really. My mom keeps telling me to sleep in my own bed, but I fell asleep last night after she sang to me in her room." "Oh, did you get to sleep in your mom's bed?" I asked hopefully. "No, I fell asleep on the floor outside her closet." "What were you doing on the floor next to the closet?" I asked nervously. "Well, she sings to me through the closet door. Her voice is real quiet now, so I get close. I guess I fell asleep on accident, 'cause that's where she woke me up this morning." I was speechless. Charlie must have seen the panic flit across my face, because he looked upset suddenly. "It's okay, Miss B. I promise. I'll sleep in my own bed tonight, and I'll sleep better." He sounded desperate. "My mom says I'll be fine. I just have to help her take good care of me." I reassured Charlie and sent him off to recess, but I decided that I would have to talk to his mom in person that day. I couldn't keep trying to deal with this quietly, and I was worried that the situation was getting out of hand quickly. What did he mean, through the closet door? I walked Charlie home that afternoon. He was silent for most of the walk, a stark contrast to the other time we'd walked hand in hand together, when he spent the entire time regaling me of the latest Saturday morning cartoons. When we reached his front door, he produced the key on a chain around his little neck and deftly inserted it in the lock, like the experienced latchkey kid he was. It was when he pushed the door open that it hit me. Rot. That was what I had smelled on his sweater this week. It was the smell of roadkill, of a butcher shop dumpster. It was the smell emanating from the little bungalow where I stood on the threshold. Charlie walked right into the house, like he didn't notice the oppressive wall of scent pushing me backwards towards the sidewalk. "Mom!" he called out inside. I held my coat sleeve over my nose and pushed forwards behind him. "Mom, Miss B is here." Silence. The house was completely still, save for the buzzing of a single fly in the kitchen. Charlie walked through the living room and the kitchen to the short back hallway. I crept warily behind him. "Mrs. Collins?" I called out hesitantly. I scanned the kitchen for the source of the smell, but saw nothing. "I'm so sorry to intrude. I just wanted to speak to you directly." I labored to breathe through my mouth, the smell becoming more intense as I moved further into the house. "She's in here," Charlie informed me, but she told me I wasn't allowed to come into the closet with her. "Charlie," I instructed, my voice wavering, "will you go outside and sit on the sidewalk for me? I want to talk to your mom for a second, just us grown-ups." "Okay." He hesitated. I smiled at him, trying to hide my fear and my overwhelming disgust. He glanced at me, and into the bedroom, and back at me again. All right. He left the room and went back towards the front door, looking back at me several times. I stood in the hallway, doing my best to look cheerful. "Mrs. Collins?" I called out again, taking a deep breath through my mouth. My stomach lurched, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand at attention as I crossed the threshold into the bedroom. "Mrs. Collins?" I practically whispered, facing the slatted white doors of the closet. Nothing. The room was silent, save for the rushing of my blood in my ears. I stared into the dark gaps between the wooden slats. I felt as if there were eyes on me, burning as they returned my gaze, but I saw nothing. As quick as I could, I pushed down my terror and whipped open the door. "Are you Miss Bell?" the officer asked. I looked up at him from where I sat on the frozen lawn, my arm around Charlie. I nodded, staring back at my shoes on the edge of the sidewalk. "Yes, I'm the one who called." I heard the rattle of the gurney as the EMTs brought it through the front door. I pressed Charlie's head into my shoulder so he couldn't turn to see. I squeezed my own eyes shut. I had seen enough already. A female officer took Charlie from me and Saturday him in the back of a squad car. I Saturday still on the cold grass, feeling the ice slowly melt into my polyester work slacks. "You said you spoke to his mother yesterday evening?" the officer questioned, standing in front of me on the broken concrete squares. "No," I said. "Charlie spoke to his mother yesterday evening. I called the house on Thursday and she didn't pick up. Everything was relayed to me through him." "Okay, and when did Charlie say his father took off?" "Saturday before last. I found out that Monday." I swallowed hard. Silence hung in the air as I watched the red and blue lights bounce off the houses before I spoke again. "How long do you think she was in there?" The officer let out a long breath through his teeth. The scent of Mrs. Collins still hung in the air with the front door left open. "My best guess, 2 weeks." I nodded again, shutting my eyes but quickly opening them again. Every time I closed my eyelids, I saw her there, her eyes wide open and hollow, her mouth agape, her dry fingers wedged in her husband's belt, her flesh peeling wetly off the bone, her feet hovering above the ruined carpet, the remnants of a housekeeper's crisp uniform, stained beyond bleaching, the envelope with my handwriting soaking in red and brown. I changed schools that fall. I wasn't sure I could handle another year in that neighborhood, driving so close to Charlie's house every morning and every evening. I didn't think I had the stomach to help other students with their family struggles, having seen what I had seen that winter. I called Charlie's grandmother a few times to see how he settled in with her, 2 states away. I hoped that he was young enough to forget and move on with time. It was better he was far away, where his father wouldn't know to look, if he ever cared to. The police weren't able to find the man as far as I know, and I pray every day that he's dead in a ditch somewhere. What kind of a man could do that to his wife, and then leave his son alone with the aftermath? It made me sick with rage and sadness. I left another letter for Charlie's mom, this time on her grave. I hope she knows that he's being looked after when she couldn't. God knows she tried her hardest. I first discovered the wreck a week ago, and I pray to God that I am strong enough to never return to it again. Already, I can feel something urging me to go back. I am a good man and will do my best to resist the temptation. I know already that it will not be easy. "What was all that about?" said Sarah as we loaded our scuba gear into the back of our old pickup truck. I grinned, flexing my muscles playfully. "There is something down there." "Oh, please, you're not trying to pull one over on me, are you?" Her gaze lingered on my chiseled physique, a testament to years spent working in the dive industry as an instructor and course director. "I'm not kidding. There really was something. A submarine." Sarah raised her eyebrows and began peeling off her figure-hugging wetsuit, and I could not help but notice the admiring glances of a couple of younger passing tourists. I am sure she was aware of their lustful glances. She exudes an effortless sensuality, and exposing her tanned skin and skimpy bikini does not seem to bother her in the slightest. "Stop kidding around. We have dived this spot 100 times at least. You know as well as I do that there is nothing down there." But she was wrong. It had begun as a usual Saturday for us, diving together as we often do. Sarah is not only my girlfriend, but also a talented photographer whose stunning images have graced the pages of international magazines. Her skill and professionalism have won her countless awards, and today she was intent on getting some shots of an invasive mantis shrimp species that had started to become more common in the azure waters around the Maltese coast. As we descended into the water, Sarah immediately began searching for the shrimp. She knew where they were likely to be found, but the search process was tedious. I followed along dutifully, watching her graceful form move through the ocean like a mermaid. However, after 10 minutes of this slow-paced exploration, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed a little more excitement, so I signaled to Sarah that I was going off on my own for a bit, and she gave me a playful wink before continuing with her search. As I swam away, I looked back and couldn't help but admire how she moved through the water effortlessly and gracefully. She was more than capable of taking care of herself in these shallow depths, but sometimes I couldn't resist the urge to protect and watch over her from a distance. As I descended into the familiar waters, the sun shimmered through the crystal-clear ocean, casting undulating diamond-shaped patterns upon the enormous blocks of rock littering the shallows. I gently finned over the lip off the drop-off at 20 meters and looked down. My attention was immediately drawn to a large, dark shape that seemed to lie upon the sandy bottom at perhaps 30 meters, like a giant guardian of the depths. My heart raced with excitement as I moved closer, and my eyes widened in astonishment as I realized what the object could be. Without hesitation, I swam deeper, eager to investigate this unexpected discovery that filled me with a sense of both euphoria and fear. The German U-boat had presumably lain undisturbed upon the seabed for over 70 years, a haunting reminder of the past. Its once sleek and deadly exterior was now rusted and covered in algae, giving it a strange, ghostly appearance. As I dove towards it, a feeling of unease settled in my stomach. What tragic circumstances had led to its sinking, and what secrets were hidden within its flooded confines? At a depth of 30 meters, I would get through my air fairly quickly, and I also had limited time if I wanted to avoid decompression stops. But my curiosity prevailed, and I swam towards the stubby conning tower. Only then did I start to worry that the sub might contain dead bodies. What had happened to the crew? Had they been able to escape? Or was their final resting place within the flooded confines of this steel sarcophagus? I know now that I should never have done what I did, but I could not stop myself. An overwhelming urge gripped me, and I peered through the open hatchway into the mysterious and dark interior of the wreck. Later, when I returned to Sarah's side, she was still absorbed in taking photographs and hardly acknowledged my return. Excitedly, I grabbed her arm and shook it, trying to get her attention. She gave me an annoyed look as I thrust my dive slate in front of her mask. After much signaling and insistence, she only read what I had hastily scribbled on its surface in pencil. I found a wreck. Understandably, she looked surprised, as we knew there was no known wreck within 5 miles. Slightly begrudgingly, she followed me towards the drop-off. I was leading and kept looking over my shoulder to ensure Sarah was still following. I could hardly contain my excitement as we swam over the ledge and looked down. Sarah gave me what I would call one of her looks as I stared down at the seabed in disbelief. The U-boat had vanished, but there was something there. I saw it, I told Sarah later as we drove back to our apartment. You thought you saw something, she corrected. Maybe you were just narked. It looked pretty deep. I suppose that could be it, I said. All the problems with Jurgen and the dive school must be getting to me. She smiled and ran her hands through her salty blonde hair. I'm thinking of taking a long shower when we get back, she said nonchalantly, before shooting me a suggestive glance from underneath her lashes. And you should join me. You really could use some stress relief. We both could. Sarah put the radio on, and we drove back to our beachside apartment. She sang along beautifully and harmonized with the songs on the radio, and I lost in anticipation of what was promised to come. As we pulled into the driveway and I killed the engine, Sarah hopped out of the pickup and headed for our apartment. Come on, slow. Coach, let's wash off all that dried up salt together, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but vibrant with promise. Perhaps we can find our kind of adventure in the depths of all that shower steam, shall we? I grinned and followed her into the apartment. I did not mention that I had peered down the hatchway into the flooded submarine, or that I had explored its darkness. All the problems I am now experiencing with my dive school started about 5 years ago. As the price of exotic destinations dropped and more unique scuba diving destinations became available, my business slowed down. My customers seemed to have been lured away by the white, powdery beaches and waving palm trees of places like the Caribbean, the Maldives, and even Papua New Guinea. It was getting so bad that I swore that I would strangle the next diver I heard mouth that well-worn phrase, "The Med is dead." Eventually, last year, against my better judgment, I took on a partner, Jürgen. He offered to buy half of my business and bring in lots of extra customers through his network of dive clubs in his native Netherlands. It seemed like the perfect solution at the time. To begin with, things went very well. After spending so many years of hard work building up my dive business by renovating an old derelict building on the coast, adapting a fishing boat, and paying for expensive advertising in glossy dive magazines, I was suddenly able to relax a little and let my partner take some of the strain. This turned out to be a mistake. Before long, almost 8% of our customers were from the Netherlands, and I was getting hardly any bookings from anyone else. Even when I did have some of my own customers, I got the feeling that they were less than happy that the dive trips were dominated by Jürgen's customers, who all seemed to know each other. Not too long after, Jürgen came to me insisting that he should get more than 50% of the profits, as he was bringing in most of the customers. We argued about this constantly, and it even got to the stage where he threatened to sell his share of the business to another acquaintance of his and take his divers elsewhere. 2 weeks ago, Jürgen announced that he wanted to buy me out. After all these months of bickering, I was on the verge of accepting the less than fair market price he had offered me, but that was before I discovered the wreck. The day after I found the mysterious U-boat, Jürgen took a boatload of his customers to one of the local dive sites. Sarah was planning to review the digital shots of shrimp and edit some other work, but the deadline was rapidly approaching. Her little hobby, as she had termed it a few years ago, had become a real success. "Have a great day at the dive school," she said, giving me a quick kiss before hurrying off to the room she used as her office. I had no intention of telling her what my actual plans were. An hour later, I was passing over the underwater ledge and looked down. The wreck was there, just as it had been when I first found it. A hauntingly dark silhouette set against bone-white sand. I had not imagined it. The wreck really did exist. This time, I made sure that I was suitably equipped to allow myself a thorough examination of my discovery. As wrecks go, it was rather odd. It sat upright on the bottom, its ship-like bow slightly buried in the sand. I swam around it but failed to find any obvious damage, making me wonder whether the crew had deliberately sunk it. It just sat there, on the bottom, as if silently waiting, hidden in the depths until it was time to pounce. Reaching the conning tower, I gazed down through the open hatch. Surprisingly, there was little marine growth around the edges, and after clipping a guideline to the stubby radio mast, I went inside. My first impression was one of intense cold. I guessed that this might have been due to sunlight from above, being unable to penetrate the wreck to warm the non-moving water within it. As I played my powerful torchlight over the interior, a mass of pipework and sheathed wiring, I could not help but feel a sense of great curiosity. There did not seem to be any apparent reason for the U-boat sinking. Due to the confined space, moving around was difficult. I had opted for a small rebreather instead of traditional scuba to avoid the risk of my bubbles stirring up sediment, which could quickly reduce the visibility to zero. The rebreather also offered the considerable advantage of plenty of gas for a long dive and deco stops afterwards. Fine greenish sediment had settled on every surface, and even my gentle movement through the water dislodged fine rust, which rained down from above, reducing visibility to no more than a meter ahead. My torch, which is hugely powerful and one of the best on the market, seemed unable to penetrate the somber interior efficiently. It was as if the darkness had a substance of its own. It soaked up light like a sponge. Cautiously, I edged forward, Going deeper into the aquatic mausoleum, the water around me felt somehow thicker, and I had the impression that I was swimming in treacle. The darkness increased. How could the inside of a submarine be so damned big? I had swum for what I considered a considerable distance, yet there seemed to be no end to the cavernous interior. After another 5 minutes of finning, I stopped. I figured that I must have swum a couple of 100 meters. There was no way that this type of sub could be so big inside. Hell, it wasn't anywhere near so long on the outside. It just did not make sense. The other and more worrying reason that I had stopped was fear. My light was almost useless. Examining it, I could see that it burned brightly enough, yet the darkness was somehow darker and hungrier. It was then that I noticed the smell. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that is the best way to describe it. It was as if I could smell something rancid, a rotting stench that I could taste through the rebreather's mouthpiece. I inched forward, my heart pounding in my chest and ears like thunder. The smell was almost overpowering. Suddenly, I came within inches of some kind of barrier, a wall of thick, undulating darkness. I sensed that the darkness was waiting. For what? I had no idea, but strangely, I felt sure it had been waiting for a long time. Don't ask me what made me do it. Curiosity? Stupidity? Who knows? Tentatively, I reached out. I watched as my hand disappeared, engulfed by the blackness. The pain was immediate and excruciating, a freezing coldness that penetrated the very bones of my finger and began to spread up my wrist and into my arm. I felt, touched pure evil. In horror, I screamed, snatched my hand back, and retreated as fast as I could towards the conning tower and its open hatchway. I did not bother to collect my guidelines. I fled for the surface in terror, up towards the light. I had no intention of ever going back after that first dreadful experience. For 2 days, I managed to pretend to myself that it had simply not happened. I began to wonder whether or not there might have been something wrong with my recollection of events. Perhaps I was the effects of nitrogen narcosis, though that is not something that has seriously affected me in over 30 years of diving. A distant family member is often described as not playing with a full deck. She spent some time in an asylum. I hope it is not hereditary. I had almost deliberately forgotten about the wreck until I mentioned it to Jürgen. Afterwards, I reasoned that telling Jürgen was an attempt to accept that I was not crazy and had indeed seen something. Of course, now I realize there might have been some other motive for telling him. From the moment I told him about the wreck, he was hooked. Where was it? How deep? Would it make a good dive for customers? It was the first time there had been any semblance of friendship between us for months. He insisted that we should explore it together. How could I refuse? As we descended towards the submarine, I watched Jürgen's face. When the ghostly shape of the wreck began to become visible, his eyes grew wide with excitement. He turned to me and grinned, then finned towards the conning tower. I followed. The wreck looked exactly the same as the last time I had seen it. A chill of memory shivered down my spine. Jürgen looked down into the wreck and then, seemingly on impulse, took hold of the guideline I had left last time and followed it headfirst down into the gloomy innards of the submarine. I did not want to go inside again, but felt grudgingly that I ought to stay with my partner. Inside, it seemed even colder than before. Jürgen was kneeling on the bottom, looking around with his torch. Holding the guideline, he indicated that I should go first and that he would follow. I shook my head and signaled that he should lead. He shrugged and then set off, with me close behind. We swam for quite some time before Jürgen stopped and turned to me. He looked confused. We had been swimming for a ridiculously long time. Considering the size of the U-boat, he appeared worried. But I gave him the okay sign, which seemed to be all the reassurance he needed. He swam deeper into the darkness. Nervously, I followed him. Not long after, I began tasting that revolting smell I had previously experienced. The apparent thickness of the water seemed to slow our movements tenfold, and the light from our torches withered to pathetic conicals of light. We had reached oily blackness. I have no satisfactory explanation for what I did next. Perhaps it was because Jürgen had virtually stolen my dive school from me. It might even have been that I simply did not like him anymore. Whatever the reason, it is sufficient to say that I pushed him into the blackness. Jürgen fell forward and was immediately engulfed. For a brief moment, I felt relieved, glad to be rid of him. Then all hell broke loose. His panic-stricken face reappeared through the oily film. His mask and regulator were gone, and he was screaming in terror. I could actually hear his muffled cries as vast bubbles of air spewed from his mouth. The darkness began to retreat deeper into the wreck, and it seemed to be dragging Jürgen with it. His arms flailed wildly, his fingers desperately trying to grab onto something. I could hear and see his fingernails scraping and splintering against the cold metal floor. Then he was gone. I felt no guilt, only a weird kind of revulsion. It was the kind of excited disgust that I had when, as a kid, I had peered into the gutter at the mashed remains of some poor animal. A cat, I think, that had been hit by a car a few days before. How long would this thing, whatever it was, be satisfied with one person? I wondered. I turned and left. Ascending to the surface, I looked back down, half expecting the wreck to disappear. It hadn't. All this happened a matter of days ago, and since then, I have been haunted. I have been haunted by the ghosts of my life, people who have at some time caused problems for me, let me down and disappointed me. Since I have spent most of my life in the diving industry, it is not surprising that most of these people are also divers. It would not be hard to persuade them to explore a virgin wreck of a U-boat with me. It is a temptation that I must resist for the sake of all that is good. I am a good man. Last night, I started to draw up a list of potential diving partners' names. It is just a game. Really, I do not intend to do anything with this list. I am a good person. The list is a lot longer than I had expected. And with that, remember, sometimes the scariest things aren't the monsters in the dark, but the ones lurking in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal themselves. Who knows, maybe that strange noise you heard last night wasn't just your imagination. Stay safe and keep an eye out, because you never know what's hiding right behind you. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time, sleep tight.